Hello, wrestling friends. It's me, Matt Coon, and I'm here with the Gentleman Villain Podcast with, of course, the star, the host of our show, the Lizard King himself, Mr. William Regal. How are you today, sir?
I'm wondering. Doesn't matter how I am. More to the point, Matt, how are you? Because you're looking very butch there in your checked, rugged shirt, and you look wonderful.
Well, I lost
ready
my
to
hard
command the day.
I lost my hard hat, so I wore the checkered shirt. Yeah, I'm great because number one, this is a show we're taping. Unlike the other ones, it's not that far in advance, so we can actually talk about some things that just happened.
Ooh.
And I've seen you on TV a lot recently. We saw, of course, the pay-per-view, the Forbidden Door. We saw Blood and Guts. And I guess my main thing I wanted to ask you about was the appearance of debut of one Claudio Castagnoli.
Yeah.
How was that for you to see your old, I don't want to say enemy, but your old rival on AEW television?
Absolutely wonderful. I've talked, and I believe it was on Renee's podcast, about how much I think of Claudio, but incredible to have him not only a part of AEW, but is one of my favorite people. I think he's one of the great professionals of the world, and everybody can learn from, just if they only watch the way he carries himself backstage. We could do a whole podcast on my admiration for Claudio, and he's a pro through and through. He's incredible. Everything about him, the way he carries himself, what he's gone through, how he's got to this point in his life, just getting to America. That I've got so many things that I think he is, and I really do think he is quite possibly when I say the best professional around today, and maybe as much as anybody ever. That's again, let's go into that in another time, because
that's quite a compliment, though.
That's just the way he carries himself. That's the way he's so good at his job. The way that you never hear him. The way he conducts himself. His intelligence, his willingness to help younger talent, his willingness to do what's right in the job, his willingness to. He speaks 5 languages fluently. I believe 6 now, because the last time this is a couple of years ago. I know he was, I believe it was Mandarin. So maybe he's mastered that, because he masters everything else. So to have him on AEW is incredible for everybody, and not just as a wrestler, just for the way he conducts himself. And if you can't, as a young wrestler, look at him and go, take lessons, perhaps you shouldn't be in this job. Perhaps it's time that you need to go and get a job somewhere else, because if just look at him and the way he looks and the way he dresses, this is just talking to wrestlers now, and the way he conducts himself and his manners and that's what everybody should strive to be, in my opinion. So,
as a wrestling fan, we saw him come, of course, we've been watching for a long time as either pre-WWE or in the WWE, and he comes in AEW like a monster.
This is a whole podcast, because he's incredible. He's got everything that's good about wrestling. He's it all put together, and as a professional, as a talent, his abilities is there's some and silly things out there that people think he can't talk, or is not the best at promos. He is. Unfortunately, he's one of the people who will always be, because he's so good, he can get took for granted, I think.
Right.
And that's the problem. Sometimes when you're so good, you do get took for granted. This will lead into a little. I know the what we're talking about today, so keep that in mind, and please remind me about this later, because it will play into my early months in WCW. There's an interview that I did before my last match, which was against Claudio. I didn't know it was going to be against Claudio at the time, but I knew my time was pretty much coming to an end, and I didn't think I'd be wrestling, and I probably wouldn't ever wrestle on TV again, because there was a lot of things going on in 2013 that I knew then I wasn't long for my career as far as a wrestler because of health issues. I wanted to go out. I didn't want any, I don't care about any of that. It's just, there's nothing in my house that I don't have a single thing that you would know I was a wrestler. I didn't want, I'm a pro, I'm a journeyman pro wrestler who had a career, and I was incredibly grateful and happy that I've had a career.
No keepsakes at all? Like
I've got stuff and it's stuck in
a box somewhere.
In the attic. Yeah. My wife was cleaning out the attic the other day. Dirty, filthy, covered in cobwebs, but she's good to the kids. Anyway, there we go. There's one to start with. And I had my last match with him because the following year, my legs went from under me, and then I had to have over a year of different neck surgeries and whatever to put that right. I'm so glad it was with him. There's an interview that I did at the time, right before that match, and I'm very rarely ever going to say go back and watch what I did. But if you can just watch that interview, the promo before the match, I sum up a lot of things, my career and what it was, but also what I thought. And I knew going into that match, there was nothing, I was outmatched. I think he's 10 times the man and 10 times a wrestler than I ever was. Right? And I mean that, right? He's so good at what he does. So to have him as part of, and it's all reality based. Again, that's why the Blackpool Combat Club works so well, because everything is reality based. And it's like somebody's been building this story up for the last 22 years. If you go back and watch what's happened with the Blackpool Combat Club, and I'm just lucky, it's no secret. I got asked to by Daniel Bryan to be a part of this incredible thing that I'm with at the moment. And then Jon Moxley is, we have history, but I also have a long history with Claudio. Claudio turned up at Dave Taylor's. Dave Taylor had a wrestling school. It was a finishing school for people who were already pro wrestlers. And it's about 1.5 miles from where I'm sat right now. Dave lives about 3 miles from me. And the very first week, 3 people turned up. Ace Steel, Chris Hero, and CM Punk. I believe that was 2003.
It's not a bad group. Not a bad group at all.
And so, again, I have my start of my connections with, we've already talked about with Brian and with Brian Kendrick and with John Cena and with Samoa Joe and Chris Daniels and Frank Kazarian in 2000. Well, in 2003, then I get, there's all stuff going on, but 2003 at Dave's school turns up CM Punk, Chris Hero, and Ace Steel, right? So I got to spend a few days with them. Short time later, Danny Birch, Martin Stone, he was another person who came to Dave's school. He flew himself over from England and spent the week with us. Well, not long after that, Dave called me, because I used to be away Monday and Tuesday, doing Raw and SmackDown. And then I'd come back and I would go in there. As soon as I got home, I would drop my bags and then I'd just drive the 1.5 miles and I'd be at Dave's school for the rest of the day on Wednesday, be at Dave's school on Thursday, Friday, or sometimes I'd have to leave Friday. So I'd usually get at least 1.5 days with the talent that was coming for that. It was like week camps of up in your game kind of thing. And Dave said to me, I've got a lad coming from Switzerland. And I went, oh, right, good. He said, yeah, he's been wrestling over there and I've heard some good things about him. And once he told me the name, I'd heard some good things about him because I always knew what was going on. Well, this is the story. There might be some things that aren't quite right, but this is basically the story. Dave turned up. The class started at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. Dave turned up at his school at 9 o'clock because Dave's a stickler for getting there early. Right? Dave got there 9 o'clock, and outside he stood this statuesque gentleman with a bag at his feet, just stood absolutely straight backed with his arms folded. And Dave went, "Hello, I'm Dave." And he went, "Hello, my name's Claudio." He said, "Oh, right, okay. Oh, how you doing? Good flight? Yeah, good flight. Yes, sir, yes." Very polite. Dave's looking for a car. "Oh, have you left what you done? Come from, there's like the nearest hotel where a lot of them used to stay was about 2 miles away." He said, "You come from there?" No. He said, "No, I've come from the airport." He said, "Oh, you got a cab?" "No, I walked." "Well," so I walked. He landed the night before. He's got a map out because he's,
Right.
highly trained. I let him tell his own story, but Claudio's done a lot of things in life. Well, part of it is very intelligent, right? He had a whole nother life and was that's his story to tell. He doesn't, I don't think a lot of people know, but very smart lad, very smart. Got a map out and mapped his way so he didn't have to go on the highway all the way through and some not so clever places in Atlanta to get through, and he's waiting so he can be there on time.
Wow.
That was the start of me going, "Oh, this is somebody who wants to really do this."
That's a great first impression.
Right. And and as soon as I saw him, I got there and then saw him. And again, that might not be the actual tale, but that was the tale that I was told. And I wouldn't question it in the slightest because I know what he's like. I mean, he still makes his own gear, right? He's a Renaissance man of the highest order. He makes his own trunks.
That's insane.
He makes his own jackets. It's like in a different league of whatever. So we spent that week with him, and then he was very fortunate. Well, the wrestling world was fortunate because he applied to the green card lottery. I don't know, this probably, it might have changed now, but at the time, anybody from all over the world can apply for the green card lottery unless you are English or Japanese. I might get a bullet in the head from the FBI or something for saying this story, but I don't know why that was the case. I'm just assuming, and you should never assume, but I'm just assuming that there was more than enough people with green cards that were English or Japanese at the time, and you could apply for a green card if you weren't English or Japanese. And again, I could have that wrong, but that's what I know because I had to get a green card, and the steps, it was a big deal to get a green card at the time. Well, Claudio applied for the green card lottery, and thankfully he won it. And so he was able to move over here. So we'd get, and then the next thing, he's all over the independent scene in the Northeast and everywhere and everything. And he would have got here anyway because somebody would have snatched him up because of how great it was. But it was a lot harder in those days. So that's a great thing that happened to him. But and for everybody involved, everybody wants to thank the people at the green card lottery. It was a great bit of fortune for him, but he ended up coming here. And I know, so my dealings with independent wrestling were a lot because of me always having contact. Before it was a job for me with extras that would come to WWE shows.
Right. People looking to get booked on
Right.
one off and get seen and all.
Get seen.
Right.
And everybody that I ever met was always talking about Claudio. That's when there's again, there's nothing and nobody bigger than a myth, right? And that we've talked about some of the myths that seem to follow me around, but everybody that had ever come in contact with him talked about how much of an impression he was leaving on whatever locker room he was in because of the way he carries himself. So that being said, we'll leave that because I could go on and on. We'll leave that because we've got stuff to talk about. I couldn't be happier. I couldn't be happier than have Claudio in our group, and it's a reality-based thing because, again, I have history with him, and so we've always been in contact with each other. I didn't think it was going to be my last match, but it was. I did make big part of making that match happen because I wanted to make sure that there was at least 3 people that I wrestled. I picked 3 people. Actually, there's 4. And Chris Hero is in that group. But there was started off with Daniel Bryan. I think we've talked about the match that I had with him in 2011 that people seem to watch, the one on Superstars, and
yes, sir.
I made sure that I wanted, because I thought if I don't wrestle again, he's the person who spent the most time with me. Then there was I met Jon Moxley, and I was asked by Dusty Rhodes, which is somebody who will come very much into this episode. He had a vision. He used to call Jon Moxley as James Dean. He used to call me, Dusty used to call me is Peter O'Toole, because he likened actors he was fans of to certain people who he met, and like to that he looked at visions as telling movies, which paid off a lot with me as far as the way I look at things. And I ended up doing a 12-month story in FCW with Jon Moxley and 2 matches. And the final match was, and this is the bit that is, this is where I'm skating on thin ice with my own standards, because I don't like giving away wrestling stuff too much. But I wanted to make sure, because I didn't know how long I was going to wrestle. Again, there was so much of the last few years of my career. I thought it's any time now. There's something's going to go, because I had so many things going on and wasn't telling anybody. But I was so many injuries, so many different. There was heart things. There was all kinds. But there was people I met and thought I want to do something with them. So the second match that myself and Jon Moxley had, I wanted to make sure that he beat me in it. Part of that match, and it's true, he put my head against the exposed turnbuckle and stamped on my head and tore my earlobe off. And I had to, and I know WWE put that picture out in one of their magazines, so it's of my ear being stitched up. There's interviews at that time. There's me doing promos on the show where you can see different times where you can see my ear was stitched up for a while. He ripped my earlobe off, and there was so much blood because there was a blood ban that whoever was backstage calling was going, stop it. And they were sending people in, and me and John were like screaming at him to get out. But I eventually got up onto my knees, like this person, this diabolical villain who's more of a villain than I am, but I like him because he is a villain. And I just got up and applauded him, and then he hit me with my finish.
Wow.
And beat me. So if you ever get to watch that, that's that story. But that story played out over 12 years. I'm going to give a shout out to a fella. I don't know who he is. He put a little 6-minute piece together on YouTube called True Villains. If you ever want to see it's not all of what myself and John did, but it is a work of art of, it's like, and some of it's in black and white and that, but it's snippets of the 12 months that we told this story about us being like-minded individuals, and me knowing, and I'm just telling a story at the time, but it ended up really being the case, and now it's playing into this Blackpool Combat Club. The whole story for a year was, I know because of this man's diabolical mind, he's going to be the person that finishes me, that takes me out of wrestling. If you actually watch that story, and it's a lot of FCW to watch for a year, but the whole time I'm on commentary or when he's in the ring, I'm talking about, I know that there can't be 2 of us. It is really like a movie in itself. I'm saying, look, I know I'm the most diabolical villain on this, but he's the one that's younger than me and more sadistic, and he's going to finish me off. Wow. And that was the whole story of that. So that's where our story comes from. And this gentleman put this thing together called True Villains, which was all on, none of it was just an idea of Dusty's to start this thing. And we didn't know where it was going to go. We started it and we just did what we did, and was no real, we just did it for a year. So it comes round to the next thing, which I did a thing with Chris Hero. Well, then it was coming to the end of, I knew I was 45, that there were things were mounting up. I wasn't well, but I wasn't going to tell anybody. But I made sure Claudio was the person who I wanted. If this was going to be it, I wanted a match with him. We have one match, which was as good a finishing match as I could have with what was going on with my health at the time. I couldn't have asked for it with any, and he did jump on my head with 2 feet at the end of it.
As you said on commentary.
As I said on AEW, he jumped on my head with 2 feet and he finished me off. And in this promo before, and I actually say, I know that there's only a miracle is going to save me from getting beat now. And a miracle's not coming to a faithless old villain like me. So there's some things to learn for young wrestlers there. It's the only, some people, like, you can't do a promo saying you're going to get beat. Makes no sense to say you're going to get beat, go for it.
Right.
I did a promo saying, so you take that for whatever you want, and how it was put together, but it meant it had to me that the right things had to be said and structured. Well, they weren't really, I didn't think about it. It just came off my head. Because I was allowed, at that time, I was allowed to just do stuff because I had trust with WWE. So they trusted me to just do my own stuff. And I did, it was a one-take shot, and I did that promo. And I sum up my whole career. I sum up the fact that Claudio is 10 times the person in wrestling I'm ever going to be, or ever was. Sorry, not ever going to be, but that I ever was. And I know this is what this is about. He's got to prove a point that he is better than me. And I know he's going to beat me, but I'm still going to go out fighting. And I can't think, the final line is, I can't think of a more noble way to go than being beaten by the ultimate competitor.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And so that story now, all these things, if I ever actually want to bring them up, or if you're listening to this, or you go and hear me say things on commentary, there's actual proof that you can go back and look at them and see how this all, it's like somebody's been writing it for the last 22 years.
There are no accidents, though, you know?
It's great. I'm loving it, and I'm so happy he's here. And let's get on with today's subject, because my gushing over young Claudio is enough.
Well, he's a handsome man, and you know, we're going to get to our subject today, which is Mr. Regal debuts in WCW. But first, this episode is brought to you by Car Shield, who makes it easy and affordable to protect my car. And believe me, I need it from expensive repairs. And that's just for starters. Car Shield is the #1 auto protection company in the U.S. and offers protection plans for around $100 a month. The plans cover more parts. That's pretty good, right?
It's good. Yeah. It's good. They're actually, just to quickly, I know I'm allowed to jump in. A lot of people, some remember this from something I said years ago, but I have daughters, and they're conjoined twins, and they're actually sponsoring them the most. They've gone to England because the other one likes to drive occasionally. So
Christ. You know, I don't know you that well yet, so I don't know much about your kids. So when you said it, I was just like trying to get all the sympathy I could.
So yes, that's good. Wonderful company.
And Car Shield will cover it regardless of which one of your conjoined twins is driving.
Yes.
And it is and like I said, about $100 a month. And I don't know what the rates are for conjoined twins. You might want to call to get that information. The plans cover more parts than ever before, whether your car has 5,000 miles or 150,000 miles. Let me tell you how simple it is to get your car fixed. When you need a repair, you choose the mechanic, and Car Shield's administrators handle the rest. That's it. You don't have to deal with the paperwork or headaches. You're taken care of. Same goes if your car breaks down and you're stuck on the side of the road, which has happened to all of us. Plans through Car Shield also include coast-to-coast roadside assistance. Car Shield administrators are there for you with rental car options and trip reimbursements at no extra cost too. Get coverage today. We all need it. We all break down. We all have cars that don't do exactly what we want them to do. And you will lock in your price now if you call today, and it will never go up. Never. That means as long as you own your car, no matter how old it is, you're protected from the rising cost of parts and repairs for your vehicle. CarShield helps protect my wallet from expensive car repairs, and they'll do the same for you. Go to carshield.com/podcast to start your plan and lock in your pricing forever. That's carshield.com/podcast. A deductible may apply. Now, Mr. Regal, you did get me on that, on your conjoined twin story.
Oh, it's right. It cost me a fortune in specially made hats. So it's
that's just
are we going to get thrown off the air?
hilarious.
We can't, because I was
terrible.
I couldn't. No, I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, how are you gonna?
I know a lot of old gags, and you have to modify them for the modern audience. No?
Well, there's no sin.
There's no sin in
no
your
life story, you know.
No.
So today, though, we are going to talk about you going to WCW, and you know, as an American. And by the way, I don't know if you know this. This is the first podcast I've ever worked on, and I've worked on a lot that has a bigger international audience than an American audience. We have over 50% of our audience comes internationally. Our biggest city that listens to us is London. And as an American hosting this show, I don't know if you notice this, but Americans tend to think we're the center of the world, Mr. Regal. And,
yes, you do. Yes, you do.
And to that end, you know, being a fan of Dynamite and being a fan of you and being a fan of all these international wrestlers, it's easy for me to assume that someone like you, who's cutting your teeth and have cut your teeth in a big way overseas, is that it's your dream to come to America. Is that the deal? Like, is America the place for a wrestler to go? Is that your viewpoint at the time?
It was mine. From me, I didn't see any American wrestling until 2 years after I already started wrestling. That's hard for people to understand, but there was no way of seeing any. We had our own British wrestling on Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock on ITV. And that was a staple for 33 years. And through my childhood, that was what I watched. And so once I started, what I did, before I was in the wrestling, which was is it just gone? Actually, I forget, but I believe it was June the 6th. Of 1983, I had my first ever match. So, and I was 15 and I had no clue what I was doing. But before then, there was anything for fans in England, right? There was no, obviously there's no there was no any of the wrestling media news sheet things that you can see now. Right. There's none of that. I never knew about any of that until I came to America. And that's why it's not really my world. I see some of it and it gives me an idea of where everybody's working, which is what I like. But I can also, you know, like, it's just not something that was part of my world.
But somebody, and we've talked about this, somebody who's not a wrestler, who's watching a match, writing it down, telling you what they think, good or bad, you have no time for that, because
it's not that I have no time for it. I don't want to start any of this falling out or trying to cause the sensation.
Right.
No, I just don't need it.
Right.
And because by the time I was by the time I was 18, in fact, by the time I was 17, I had the best wrestler in Britain as my trainer, who'd been trained by Billy Robinson, Marty Jones, who'd been trained by Billy Robinson since he was 6. I had access to lots of really good wrestlers. And then by the time I was 18, I had access to an incredible amount of wrestlers that I knew were all exceptional pros, who would tell me, or the promoter would tell me if I wasn't doing something right, or I could hear that the audience would tell me if I wasn't doing something right. So, and that played into when I came. So I'd look to them. If I walk through the curtain and don't get told off or get given some good advice, that was another thing. There's always people want to give you advice, but when you've got people like Marty Jones and Finlay and Rollerball Rocco and Dave Taylor and Pete Roberts and Terry Rudge and all these, I can go on, and Johnny South and people who were helpful to me, and Robbie Brookside. Robbie Brookside was an enormous help because he's 2 years older than me, and he'd been through all this, so he was happy to help me all the time. They guided the way I did things.
Sure.
So I didn't need anybody else's view of it. My job, again, I'm a journeyman pro wrestler. I'm not a ego-driven pro wrestler. I'm a pro. I do my job. I turn up, what you need, and I do it. I did it for you. I tried to. So in case you're first listening to this, there was about a year and a half when I wasn't that, which was the end, the middle of, and we talked about this on the podcast, the car crash I had in 97.
Yes, sir.
That sent me sort of off the deep end until I got the help in the beginning. I mean, January of 1999. So there's middle of 1997 all the way through 1998. I was a mess, and that's on me. But somehow I got through this, and not stupidity, all total stupidity on my part. But somehow I got through that by just from what I'd learned from people. So I had all these resources to tell me whether I was doing any good or not, or getting better at my job, or just if they didn't say anything, then I knew I had had a good night. Just not to get that.
Important.
Sometimes it came
absolutely trusted. People that
trusted, yes.
When they say it, you know it's the truth. That's it.
And so,
yeah.
Again, Matt, you have to, my brain goes in a million different directions because that's it. I've lived, we're going into 40 years now of being in this job, right? So when I came to America, straight away, I had people like Arn Anderson and Terry Taylor, and especially at very first, two people who were exceptionally helpful to my career. We'll get into the company as far as the office part of that in a minute, but I had Ricky Steamboat and I had Paul Orndorff, who because I was polite on day one, and watched what I did, and they seemed to like what I did. They would tell me what I could do differently to fit into the American or to fit into things. And so they were my guides. And then at the time, actually, when I first came here in 93, and I started on TV on January the 25th, 1993, was my first ever day. Please keep that note and remind me, because we need this great story. But at the time, Arn Anderson was not working. He was working for WCW, but the person who brought me to America, Bill Watts, had done a thing with him where he wasn't there. Bobby Eaton wasn't there. He was working in Smoky Mountain. I think they both were at the time for Jim Cornette. So they became other people within not long after they came back to WCW. I had Brad Armstrong there from day one. Brad Armstrong was incredible. And we got on like a house on fire. The first moment we met, we became incredibly good friends and stayed that way. And all his family. But I had, once, I'd already seen Brad Armstrong before I got to America, because I'd started seeing more American wrestling. They started showing it on TV in England in the late 80s. And so why do I need anybody telling me if I've done it when I've got these resources to tell me?
Fantastic.
I'm a grown man.
Right.
I'm a grown man who's had to get through this which is going to be a different podcast, but there was no easy way into the wrestling when I got into it. Right. So, and that's don't need to get into that now, but I know that I was pretty okay at what I did. It wasn't it was a confidence, because I wouldn't have gone to I'd been to 19 countries by the time I came to America. And the reason I went was because Dave Taylor, Pete Roberts, and Terry Rudge, who were three of the most world traveled heavyweights of all time, and Dave Taylor probably being the most, but Pete Roberts and Terry Rudge putting me in, and Dalabar Singh as another gentleman who was a huge influence on me. Tiger Dalabar Singh, or Gil Singh as he is known. These fellas were all international heavyweights, and they put me into all these different places. I knew that I wouldn't have got in. That's not been a big editing. That was from 20. I would not have been going to Germany. I would not have been going to different African countries. I would not have been going to Egypt. I would not have been going to wherever I was going, and Austria, without being okay at what I was doing and looking the part and acting the part and being a professional. And this is, again, another stories for other days, but I'd already earned my stripes as a professional. I didn't need anybody. I go to better professionals to ask me if I need any help. So we never need to talk about that. Well, there's times when it will come up, but I know because most podcasts are based off.
And I want to explain it for the listeners who are conditioned to that. And it's one thing that makes us different. And another thing that makes us different is, last week 2 weeks ago, you were kind enough to indulge me about one of my favorite, Sami Zayn. And I would like you just to indulge me just for a second as we go through our version of a timeline about my by far favorite wrestler when I was a kid. And I'm in contact with his son, Travis, because I got to interview him once. And that's Paul, Mr. Wonderful Orndorff. What can you tell us about, because I don't know when we're going to talk about him again. So what can you tell us about Mr. Orndorff that made him such a great source for you that you could just take to the bank what he said?
First of all, I'm be very open about this. Last year, that knocked me sideways when Paul had passed away, because he was so helpful to me, and he didn't have to be, but he was from day one. He was there for me whenever I needed any, or I'd ask him, but it helped me. But the biggest thing was watching him, how intense he was. And there's certain things that he did that was so like aggressive, and he's just like a machine. And just being around him, again, it's that pro thing of being around certain pros. He was, always training, and we talked a lot about the way, because they used to see me doing lots of Hindu squats. He didn't do that many at the time, but he talked about that. Again, it was just from day one talking about, he's seen me doing it. And that was my thing all the way through my career. And still to this day.
Even today, you've told me you did or I saw on Twitter, you were doing a certain number of Hindu squats every day. Right?
And I do them. So, that's what I do. But he was telling me about how he got into the job through Hiro Matsuda and Ron Simmons has told me the same stories. When I think certain pros who've gone through certain things seem to get on with each other. They had the life and as I say, getting the granny battered out.
Yeah, it's a shared experience.
Yeah, they had the granny battered out of them to get into this job. And I had the granny battered out of me to get into this job, right?
The granny battered out of you. That's
well, it's just me having the life battered out.
Oh, I get it. Yeah.
And put through the ringer.
Yeah.
And they did it going through Hiro Matsuda. I did going through what I did. And then more so, or continuing, but never not thinking it was a bad thing, just thinking that was the way it was. And that's what, and we're also, I'm only 24 when I come to America, but I had to be a grown man very quickly. I wasn't till I was, but when I was 17, I had to grow. We'll get into, again, another podcast. I had to grow very quickly, or else I wouldn't be here, right? That there was things that I would nearly quit over, but I sort of just had to figure a way out to get through, because I was getting put through it in this job. That's okay. And I have no ill will to anybody that did that or anything that happened, because it made me who I am and it got me to where I've got to. Some people misinterpret that and might think I'm not moaning about what I went through. I wouldn't change any of it. It made me and got me to where I am. It learnt me a lot of things, sometimes not what to do. if nothing else, we've talked about this before, open your eyes. No bad experiences. If it's a bad experience, just, if you keep your mind open, okay, what can I take not to do out of this? How can I not to treat somebody? Right? I remember the people who did things to me, but it taught me something, right? If it's just getting a good kicking, it taught me how to react very well in a wrestling match.
Sure.
Right? I'm known for being pretty, within the pro community, I'm pretty good at as the term, I don't like these things, but I'm going to have to say I'm selling. Right? It's not, and I can do it in many forms.
You were great at reacting. I mean,
reacting. I prefer the term reacting, because as you get better at this, you should learn how to react and not sell.
Sure.
You start off selling, but it's like an actor. You learn to react, not act, because otherwise it looks like acting. And sometimes that is a necessary part of this, but it's
react instead of act. Because
yes.
if you act, it looks like acting, but if you're reacting, it looks real. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Or it doesn't have to always look, it just looks better.
Right. Okay.
Right. Again, different podcasts, all these things, keep note of them, because we can go into on the question and answer things. If anybody keeps note of this, we can expand on them. But if I start now, we'll be here for 5 hours.
Oh yeah.
Right. Or 10 hours. It's just things that we need to keep. And please, everybody, if you're interested in what we're doing with this podcast, keep little notes on these things, I say, because we need to revisit them all. There's so much to revisit, especially for the young wrestlers who are listening. There's so much to revisit. I want to go here, have all this. The people like Daniel Bryan and Claudio, and there's lots of others, have been around me a lot. This is how I talk. You can't just, there's no simple answers. To me, if somebody's giving you a simple answer, they haven't really done that much. Right? They can just give you a quick formula how to do something. They haven't done that much, or they're better at it. They're just more, maybe they're just better at putting things into terms of, I know I'm not. I can't give concise answers to things. I give every experience. You have to be around me a lot to get all these things, because I can look in somebody's eyes when I'm talking to people now, and I know whether they're getting something or not. Right? If I've got a group of people, I'm going, that's not clicked with him. That hasn't. So I'll explain. I've seen it this way, and I've seen it because I have. It's not that I'm any good or I know what I'm doing. I've just seen a lot of different ways, and it can all work. It can all work. It can come from many different ways. There's no right or wrong way of doing anything. There's just certain ways of, and certain people can do it one way and certain another. There's things that I see that bother me when I watch wrestling. We talked about pins the other week.
Man, you changed my wrestling viewpoint. I texted you and I said, I'll never see it the same again.
Okay. But it doesn't matter that's the thing with wrestling, with our profession. It doesn't matter. Nothing that I can sit and tell you everything the way I see it, or what I've seen done, and the best wrestlers in the world and everything, because I've seen them or watched them or know them, but you could do the exact opposite and still connect with an audience. There's a lot of people you can go back, the incredible wrestlers, and they don't do the best of pins. They don't have to, though. That's it. You can't, none of it makes any sense. We have to try to make logic out of an illogical business. But there is no logic at the end of the day. Some people don't have to do anything right. They don't have to they can do the exact opposite, and they're a million times bigger. That's it. Some people don't want to listen to me, because why would you? Who am I? I'm just a fella with a whatever, but I'm not full of my own nonsense. So somebody who's made a lot more money than me and been 10 times world champion, rightly so, you should listen to them, right? Because they've figured it out. Because a professional wrestler's job is to make money. They've figured it out better than I have. I am just a detail person. I know what I am. I know what I'm not, right? So when it comes around to getting opinions off people, I already had a structure there. I didn't ever need anybody giving me opinions, right? Apart from the people that I had. And Paul Orndorff was one of those people. So Paul Orndorff was, for any young wrestlers, go back and study him. And if you want to ask me questions on why, we'll do that later. But
Sure.
Paul was a massive help to me, along with the people I've mentioned and many others. There's so many, right? Within a few months of me being in WCW, Ric Flair came back. Well, then I've got Rick, you know, and not only came back, but we got on great. And so I've got him to watch and ask. And I've stood in. Part of my last few years of my life before I came to America was traveling the world, right? And we've talked about squats. Well, in 1989, I started getting more stuff. And, I missed a point before. Before my time in wrestling, from about 1980, occasionally, very occasionally, in the local, it's a city now, it used to be considered a town. A town in England has to have, a city in England has to have 1 million people in it. Otherwise, it's considered a town. Over here, it doesn't matter. But it's Wolverhampton, which was the nearest town that I wasn't born. But so anybody gets this right, and because people say, I moved to Blackpool when I was 16. I was going to Blackpool from being a child because it was a vacation resort. From 15, I was going there, and that's where my wrestling career pretty much, it didn't quite start there, but that's where it started from when I was 15. And I was going there every weekend and spending every weekend there until the end of the summer season of 1983. And that end of the summer season there is the first week of November. Then everything shuts down till Easter the following year. Easter the following year, I was still at school. I was leaving school in the May of 1984, because in England in those times, if you were working class, from a working class background, there was no chance of any further education. School finished at 16 and you went out and got a job because you needed to bring money into the house. It was not like, it's just the way it was, right?
Right.
So that, I went at Easter in 1984 and back to the promoter and I said, look, I'm leaving school in a few months. He said, well, okay, you can be an apprentice here. And so I'd already been working for him the year before on a weekend, but I wasn't really, I was just a kid doing a few little things and a few little matches and working with another thing we'll get into in a different story, how I got there. But then I became his apprentice, as Robbie Brookside had been the apprentice at Worldwide Wrestling Promotions of Blackpool, which covered the Fylde in the northwest of England. But it was worldwide. So all these experiences got me here. Right. Oh, sorry. From being the local town that I was born near, Wolverhampton, where I used to go and watch wrestling every 2 weeks. And I used to see concerts and stuff because there was nothing where I lived. I lived in a little village. I started going into, as we call them, news agents. And you could get I saw a Rings Wrestling magazine.
Okay.
It changed my world as a fan. Because I knew British wrestling. Well, I knew what I knew of British wrestling, but there was no wrestling magazine. There was one wrestling magazine that came out. You could get programs from the companies that ran shows. They made a monthly program, but it was all about their wrestlers.
We talking like Pro Wrestling Illustrated, stuff like that?
Yes.
Wrestling.
So but the stuff that you could get in England, there was nothing like that.
Right.
Except for one called, there used to be an old magazine called The Wrestler.
Yeah.
It was, and I've got every copy of that. Through my friend, let me give Tom Burke, anybody who's a historian might know Tom Burke. Tom Burke, I met, he's from Massachusetts. I met him 35 years ago. He turned up in England and me and him have been he sends me old British programs and I try and catch him out sometimes. I'll go, you haven't got a picture of the Wild Man of Borneo, have you? And he sends me like 6 pictures and stuff. He's got the incredible collection. But I started getting these ring wrestling magazines. Well, then it was every so often I could get one, or I'm trying to think, it was definitely the Rings Wrestling magazine, and there was one or two others. and then it had a list of all the different, what was going on, or in their world, I believe it's called the Apter Mag world now, because I know I'm friends with Bill, but in his world, and I always say, like, that's the only things that I cared about. It's not that I cared about being in, but that's the stuff you want to be in. You don't want to be in the other stuff, because the other stuff's usually criticizing you or knocking you.
Right.
Whereas those magazines are telling stories about you and put you over as the character. So, but again, I'm from a different day and age. So I started seeing them. Well, I learned all about, there's all these places. And I knew about, there was Wrestling America, because I knew of different wrestlers that had been, or heard about Billy Robinson, heard about Tony Charles, knew that wrestlers went to Japan because of listening to the commentary on British wrestling. Because if somebody came back from somewhere, they would talk. Kent Walton, who was the announcer, would talk about, this man's just been to Calgary, this man's just been he's been wrestling in America. So that was getting put into my head from listening. Most of my wrestling education came from Kent Walton, the commentator on what is now considered World of Sport. And he'd mentioned where people had been, or he'd mentioned somebody had wrestled somebody in Japan, or so you knew about a wrestling world outside of it. But and then there was the Wrestler magazine that I have copies of, had shut down before I sort of can remember. So I didn't know about that till after I was already a wrestler. Then I managed to get all of the copies from Tom Burke.
So like a lot of us, you learned about a lot of American wrestling through wrestling magazines, right?
That's what I did. I got to know about wrestling, but I hadn't seen any.
Right.
So I knew a little bit, and I could get the occasional magazine.
Had you seen any American wrestling before you came to America?
Yes, I'd seen a lot from about 1985 onwards. A friend of mine, Peter Thompson, who still has an incredible collection, he was a wrestler and refereed sometimes, and he lived in Blackpool. He was the person when I left home who was the one who was nice to me. There was a few people nice to me, but he took me under his wing as a 16-year-old living away from home, showed me around town, knew everybody, but also he got me, Peter's a great fella. He's the fella that I was in nightclubs at 16, and we used to go everywhere because everybody knew Pete. He's a man around town. But he also he's in the wrestling, so he had this incredible wrestling collection, right? So he started getting these tapes, so we'd watch them. And then, so I started seeing some of the stuff that I'd read about in magazines. One thing that bothered me when in 1993, I came to America, and there was a lot of there was people my age. We had a great group of people. Steve Austin, Brian Pillman, Too Cold Scorpio, Chris was here. Me and Chris came in the same month. There was us that were considered, that we'd come in the late 80s or early 80s in my point, but we'd all come in different times through a different way of coming into the wrestling. And then there was the new lot, which were the people who'd gone, right, you can be a wrestler because you're a bodybuilder, and you can, right, and here's that, you do a clothesline, and that was it. There was a lot of those, and it used to bother me that I knew far more. I knew once I started collecting stuff, and then in 85, and my friend Peter had this ridiculous collection of everything, magazines, books. I stood it up on whatever I could. So I knew pretty much everything that I could find out. So I knew all about all these wrestlers, whereas all these younger wrestlers who were not much younger than me or my age, they didn't know the history of their own wrestling. And it used to, at the time, I was a bit, because of what I'd gone through, I was a bit more fiery. Let's put it that way. We'll get into those stories in a time, but there's certain, like, you just walked in off the street, basically, in a day when you couldn't, but things were changing then. You were a hairdresser, and now you're a wrestler, and you don't even know who Paul Orndorff is, or you don't know his history. But I know it, and I've never met him till now, but I know enough about it because I've read enough or watched enough of his stuff since 1985.
Did it always bother you? I don't know. Sometimes I misread you or mishear you. Did it always bother you when people didn't take it as seriously as you think
Yes,
people
at
should?
first. I remember myself and Chris,
Chris Benoit.
I'm going to have to say it, so, because I know
That's
it
fine.
still bothers people, but me and Chris came here together. A lot of people forget that he was in WCW at the same time as me. When I first came here, because he left in the June of that year. He went back to Japan.
They kind of brought him in when they brought in Jushin Liger, because they had a lot of matches with Liger and Benoit, and then I think that's when they first brought him in, I believe.
But I know he came back in 1993, because I came in at the same time. There was 4 people started around that time. There was myself, Max Payne, because Max had been in Germany with me the year before. Me and Max came from Germany to here. He could come straight to. I should have started in WCW on the 1st of January. My visa got held up a couple of weeks, so I didn't get here till the 23rd of January 1993. I had my first TV, which you can watch, and was being interviewed by Jim Ross on the 25th of January. It didn't get shown until the Saturday, I don't believe, of that week. It was a Monday, I believe. The 25th of January 1993. I arrived on the Saturday. I went to TV at Center Stage in Atlanta on Monday, and I did 2 tapings. I did an interview on the first one with Jim Ross. I did the second one. I did a match against Bob Cook, which we'll get to in a minute. Straight away, I knew I'd met Chris in 1991. There was a thing going on at the time called Eurosports, with one of the first cable stations in Europe. I was getting wrestlers from all over Europe, and we were doing these wrestling shows all in France. It was like a central point to get everybody to that was working in Germany, any of the European wrestlers and the British wrestlers. Well, Chris happened to be over there working. I was working in different parts of Germany for different promoters. He was working for Otto Vance for the CWA. We ended up meeting in a circus in Paris in the November of 1991 at a TV taping. I just finished being in Germany. I was back in England for a little bit, and I was going somewhere else. He was working for CWA. So again, there's all these stories. I only worked for CWA at certain points until 1992. That probably would have been a regular thing. But I had loads of other things going on. There was only so many spots for so many English guys, and I'd worked for him in 1989, which will play into this, by the way. Eventually, myself and Chris met each other, and I knew about Chris because I'd seen him in some of these. I could still get these Rings Wrestling magazines, and we used to get tapes from Calgary and stuff. So I'd seen him when he was younger, and stuff from Japan. And so I'd seen him, and like-minded soul. He's a few years older than me, and I'd actually been wrestling longer than him, right? So he always used to. It was a weird thing because he used to always be very like as I was the older wrestler, because that was just the way he used to be. It was the length in the job, not age, that made you
a veteran or not, right?
The veteran or not,
right?
And so he always asked me things. I mean, it's far greater thing, but that was the way it was, because he knew that he knew that I'd been in the job longer than him, and it was so me and him were sat in the dressing rooms, like, again. Arn Anderson wasn't there. Paul Orndorff was. Ricky Steamboat was. I got on great from day one. I got on great with Brad Armstrong, Brian Pillman, Steve Austin. First day. Oh, and Mick Foley had turned up on the first day. I don't think he was wrestling. I think he was injured at the time, but he was there. So yes, we're all like-minded souls. We're all wrestlers. What I consider wrestlers. Now there's this other group, and me and Chris are sat there, looking at each other, and they're talking about going out. We're watching them not watch the matches, which is a no-no. We're watching them talking about tanning beds and egg whites, which is, you should be.
The look on your face.
Well, the thing that I find now, again, you have to adapt with the times. I had to start shutting things down that were drilled into me. Otherwise, I'd be like a lot of old wrestlers, screaming and shouting and going mad about everything.
Right.
It's just different. Things have changed, and you just have to adapt with it and go with it. And I don't expect everybody to have that the kind of things that I went to, and I hope they don't. A lot of it, I try not to let them go through some of those things of, you know, I can teach you without battering the granny out of you. There's ways of doing things right. But like I see it now when I'm at work, this is now. So people listening, you might not like me next week, but anybody who knows me knows it. I'm at work now. I am not in the position that I used to be. I am talent. I am going and training people and doing whatever, but it's not part of my job.
People get that confused a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
I am talent for AEW. I am there as talent. My phone is in my bag. I check it twice a day. From the moment I walk in that building, I am trying to learn something, or I am talking about wrestling to somebody, or doing some wrestling, or showing somebody. And not that I know anything. I'm wanting to learn as much from the talent as they can teach me. I am open-minded to learning what I want to do.
Yeah, I said in the first episode that I feel you're always in teacher-student mode. You're always ready to teach something, always ready to learn something.
Yeah, and I hate that teacher thing, because then they think like I know better, and I don't. It's not. I'm just open-minded to it. But I've seen this happen, or maybe try this, or I've seen him do this, or I've seen this lady do this. It's open-minded conversations. It's not. Or if somebody asks me, what's your opinion? Then I might say, well, maybe your pins need a bit of work, or maybe this, or, you know, and explain why. The reason your pins need work, or maybe you need to work on this, it's so that the announcers can talk about everything you do and put you over. If you don't do something right, the announcers aren't going to talk about it. Sometimes they can't, because they've got other things to talk about. Here's a thought. This is how I try to explain wrestling. If you want to work at your craft, just imagine every single thing you do, and it's paying off. Right? This has never been a better. I've been saying this for God knows how many years, because people taught me this. Now it's paying off. Everything you do, can it be shown? If somebody was to watch it in slow motion, would it hold up? And could an announcer announce it, every bit of it, and make it make sense? I used to have to try and break, and I still, again, that's another topic for another day. I can break that down for you. But I've heard this term with the young people nowadays. It's a GIF world. Well, you cannot get, you can be on GIFs, but you don't want to be on the wrong ones.
True.
If your stuff is good, and it recently happened to me, I was always taught, this is before anybody knew about any of this stuff, my teachers in the early 80s taught me, would your stuff still hold up? Make sure that you get to a place where your stuff holds up in 30 years. That was the exact term that they used to say to me. Well, last week,
and here
a GIF turned up of me and Davey Boy Smith from 29 years ago. And people were going, oh, nobody cared about it at the time. I remember that, right? Because you got two English fellas doing whatever. A few people have told me since, oh, that was a big thing, right? Again, all these things change and whatever. In 2000, there was a group of young wrestlers that came along that started getting some British tapes and watching Johnny Saint, and then Daniel Bryan and a lot of the lads, all them young lads that started adding bits of British stuff into their stuff. We were doing that in 1993. There's matches of me and Chris doing stuff in 1993 that we were doing stuff then. So you want to be able to get to a point where your stuff will hold up in 30 years and make sure that there's no see-through stuff. Again, some people it doesn't matter. But if you're a normal person like me and you don't have that magic it quality of some type, you want your stuff to hold up. Well, that proved a point. And there's a lot of things out there, and I don't want to talk about me, but there's all these things that show up with me that people I follow. Twitter's a tool for me to occasionally go on to look at GIFs because I see old matches. Oh, I haven't seen that. Let me watch that. and I watch stuff, but they only show the good stuff, right? So you need to be studying your job. When I go to work now, my phone is in my bag. I am not looking at my phone. My wife knows I'm at work, right? There is nothing. I am getting paid by the company I work for to learn how to be a or in my case, I'm doing my work. So from the second I walk in the building, I am trying to get better at my job. I am helping anybody who wants to try and help. I am trying to learn myself. I am trying to figure out, okay, how the cameras work here. How do this go, and watching who does what. I'm going backstage and watching people do promos, and sometimes offering advice if I see them struggling, or watching, or seeing that, talking to talent, right? What's going on? Well, have you got any ideas for this? And we'll have open discussions. I've ended up doing last week, people showing me their matches on the phones from the week before, or 2 weeks, or a year before. Can you help me with this? Well, look, if you did this towards the camera, I could actually see it. If you do that, and I can't call it. So I hope this is all tying into the thing.
Absolutely.
If you don't do things right, the announcers can't. Not only can you not see it, so there's your GIF thing. If you do something opposite from where the cameras can get you, you can't get it GIFed, or you can't see it, but also the announcers can't call it, or they're not going to talk about it. Jim Ross, unfortunately, gets, which he shouldn't, because he's trying to help talent. He gets people who criticize him for calling them out because he says that's not a good pin. Well, he's trying to help you. He's not trying to hurt you. He's trying to help you by saying you need to tighten your pin up, or that's a lackadaisical armbar there. Perhaps if you learn how to do it well, he could talk about it and then put you over, right? So I have that set that we're talking about, the feelings that I had when I was a teenager. I sometimes get that when I look around the building and I see people on the phones all day long. When you've got 1 day a week to try to get better, I would be trying to get better. I would be asking or trying to learn something, right? You've got enough time on your own to play whatever or to chat with people or do something else on your other days that you're not at work. You should be trying to get better. I don't care one way or the other. It's entirely up to you, right? My job in where I came from in NXT, I would politely go and talk to people. Maybe you might want to invest a bit more time into this, then maybe you'd be better at it. Instead of complaining about everything, right? This isn't a fair job, right? So take all that out of it. Sometimes it works out. It doesn't matter how good you are. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes it does. And that's not my problem. What I can tell you is none of us who have got to sometimes that's it. There's the occasional person, but 99% of us who've got to anywhere in this job or had a career out of it have had to put a lot of time and hard work into figuring it out. If you're spent all your day messing about on your phone when you could be asking people and learning people, that's a problem to me. It is and it isn't. It's one of those things I've had to shut off in my brain.
Well,
it doesn't mean, and I'm going to say this out loud, don't come to me asking me just because you think you got to ask, because I will see through you quicker than you wished I could. And now that I've said that out loud, in my old job, it was my job to help, and I would help everybody. If I think you're just asking me now because you think you should, I better go and pretend that I'm asking. Don't waste my time, because I'd rather be helping somebody who cares.
You are all about sincere requests, sincere reaches out.
I had to put up with a lot of that when I'd see people, and I'd go, I'd be a bit polite. Last year in NXT, again, I was all for everything changing, because we've talked about the reasons why, because AEW starting and that style and everything is sort of time to change. And if that's a certain style that you want, then let's get the people who want to work hard at this.
Right.
There was a point last year where one of the ladies who always asks questions and always tries to get better came up to myself, Samoa Joe, and Fit Finlay, who were all sat at a table talking to each other. And everybody had their, I looked round and she said, why don't you go and instill some wisdom into somebody, to the three of us? And I said, I don't want to interrupt the phone time. So
it's all about priorities, you know?
Right.
Priorities.
It's about priorities of you're getting paid to get better at your job. Perhaps you should be getting better at your job, not trying to read about how good you are, or leave that till you get back to your room that night. If you're that bothered about trying to get yourself over. Now, here's my little rant out the way, because I am open-minded and I am not like an old wrestler, and I do not want to go back to that. But you've still got to put the time in to get there, right? There's a group of us at the moment we all started off with that. We started off. It is a real thing with us. This is a real thing, right? We want people, everybody there has worked hard to get to where they're at in their own ways. You should put that time in, and it doesn't matter what style you do. It's got nothing to do with doing the same style as anybody in the group, right? The Young Bucks, I'm going to use them as a perfect example. You've heard me talk about how much I like those lads. They, in their particular style, and they do many styles, you know, that people knock them for doing whatever they do. I've seen them do all kinds of stuff because I watch, I don't just, and whatever they do works. They have made names for themselves. They've starved and they've struggled and they've gone round and made a name. And I'm not just saying that now because I work with them. I've said this long before. You want to go and look, there's enough stuff on record of me saying good stuff about them. They went out and found their bit of this world and made it, right? If you think you're just going to cut, but they did everything they have to. They've used social media, but they've used it to create their world. Well, they've already done that, and I get it. That's a blueprint on how to do that. But when you're actually at the show, they're working on doing their stuff. They're talking wrestling ideas. And I don't really, you know, we just have a polite thing, but we have a polite little chat. Hello, how you doing? That's it. But I know that we're with their group of friends talking wrestling, talking about creating what they can do in whatever form it is. They are not playing video games. They are not texting their friends who have nothing to do with wrestling on a day that they're in the wrestling. They have got there by hard work, right? So that bit is something that I'm about. When I came to WCW, that was me and Chris were like, what are these? Why are they leaving the shows early? And Bill Watts had to actually put on a stop people leaving the shows, but that didn't matter because they still weren't watching the matches. There's very few shows that I've ever been on that I haven't watched the whole show. And if I have, I've told somebody why I've had to leave. Right? When I was in the WWE for many years, you could always guarantee Undertaker would always be there when he was there. I've told you before, I was on a lot of shows with John Cena, right? If there's no greater example of somebody who's put everything he's got into this and works 500 days a year, 30 hours a day, same as The Rock, same as any of the top people, right? Any of the top people who work at this constantly. Every single night there was a monitor set up backstage. Every single night. Why he was signing or stuff, or why he was having a PR person passing him a phone, doing radio interviews all over the world. He sat watching every single match that was on the monitor. He did his he was changed before the show started. He was doing his warm-up while he was watching the monitor and watching everything. That's why he's in the position he's in. You cannot get that. Yes, you can bluff your way through this for a while if you want to, but you're going to have to put a lot of hard work in if you want to stay around in this job. Tossing off on your phone all day is not going to help you get any better at this, unless it's watching wrestling. If you are watching wrestling, I know certain people do. So when I say people on the phones, if they're watching wrestling, trying to figure something out, that's good.
Well,
if they are not watching wrestling on there, especially when, if you're in the WWE or if you're in AEW, if Mr. Khan is paying you and you are wasting your time, you're on his money, that's a problem to me, right? He's good enough to pay you, and you are not trying to get better in that one day a week that you're there or help somebody. Maybe you should take a look in the mirror and think, what am I doing? Because you can do that on your other days, right? You should be trying to get better somehow, in some form. Are you working? If not, are you working on, why aren't you working on your promos? Why aren't you working on something? Just anything. If you are just wasting time or having, even if it's a conversation and a jovial conversation, is it involving something to do with wrestling? Or even if it's a funny story about wrestling, you might learn something about why somebody was doing something that's created that. If there's just stuff going on in the dressing rooms, right? It's about learning or asking or watching or studying or taking note, right? Otherwise, you're only going to go, and again, don't look at what other people have done. Think about you. And that's not a selfish thing, but think about, I'm not in the position I want to be. How do I get there? Well, you get there by working hard, right? Once you've got there, if you don't want to work hard anymore and you can still do that, that's your business. It's not my business. But I know that I'm at work now, my phone's in my bag and I check it twice a day because I'm there I want to learn just as much from everybody there. So I had all these feelings. I know we're going completely off as
this is the show. This is the Gentleman Villain podcast. Like when someone on Twitter said, hey, you guys talk about all these subjects. And I go, hey man, the subject is Mr. Regal on every show. The subject is what his thoughts are and what he wants to say. And so we are talking about your entrance to WCW.
Right. So
but at the same time, it is your show.
Take notes of all these things I'm saying so I can expand on them.
For sure.
Because there's so much that we can expand on.
Speaking of expansion, Mr. Regal.
No, do you want to just start off how I ended up in WCW?
Well, I do want to say that speaking of expansion, we are sponsored by Blue Chew.
Oh, yes.
And we learned last week that Mr. Regal said that Blue Chew is a great way to keep the covers off.
It's the sun. It's the summer. Yeah, and if you get the sunburn, keeps the sheets off you, fellas. I'm just letting you know.
And as you know, in any job, especially the hardworking job you do in the bedroom,
as the wife's sister said to me in bed this morning, just have your eye out that thing. You never know.
And that kind of confidence can take you far in life. It can help you in the bedroom, especially when it comes time to step up to the plate. There's some good American sports reference for you. That's where Blue Chew comes in. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but in chewable tablets and at a fraction of the cost. You can take them anytime.
You can blow lovely bubbles with them as well.
And they're blue. Yes. They're blue too. And anytime, day or night, so you can plan ahead or be ready whenever the opportunity arises. The process is simple. Sign up at bluechew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. The best part, it's all done online. So if this is something that might embarrass you, which it shouldn't, you don't have to do any visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. That sounds pretty good.
It certainly does. Yes.
No one needs to know your business. And of course,
especially that woman who works in the pharmacy where I live, the one with the cross eye and the limp and the lisp. I don't need her knowing that I've got that kind of thing going on.
Yeah, she just sees the Blue Chew and gets sad.
Yes.
She just gets sad.
That's
Blue Chew's tablets, for the 49% of us of our listeners that live there, it's important to say that they're made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. Of course, we know how excited people are to see the postman when it arrives, and the first impressions are important, but Blue Chew makes a lasting impression. And if you, I think you could agree with that it's important to have a lasting impression with a woman.
I've been married for 36 years and must have made some impression somewhere.
I put in 16 years. I'm 36 years is a long time. She must be the best woman that ever lived.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Has to be, to put up with me. Yes.
But if even you, with 36 years marriage, could benefit from extra confidence when it's time to perform, Blue Chew can help. And we've got a special deal just for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free. Free? Why not? Right? Free, Mr. Regal.
Free.
It's pretty good, you know?
Free. Unbelievable.
When you use our promo code gentleman at checkout, just pay $5 shipping. That's bluechew.com, promo code gentleman to receive your first month free. Visit bluechew.com for more details. And important. Oh, go ahead.
No, well, I'm just going to say, so it works so well. I went to the pharmacy last week and there's a lady behind. I said, I'm sorry. I said, can I talk to the manager? She said, look, you don't have to be embarrassed. Any problem you've got, you can tell me. She said, there's just me and Mary works in the back. She's the manager. She can tell me. I said, well, just won't go. Just won't go. She said, let me go and discuss with Mary. She came back. She said, the only thing we can do for you, sir, is 40 grand a year in a company car. So right.
If you want to avoid awkward conversations like that and get your confidence in the mail, visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring the podcast. Now, Mr. Regal, you've told the story before, and I hate to use this podcast, tell stories we've told before, but you contacted maybe through somebody else, Mr. Bill Watts, who was
yes,
running the company, and old school, like is 8x10 and a letter.
Yes.
And he brings you in. You talk about, you immediately meet these people, these like-minded people, Terry Taylor, Ricky Steamboat, Paul, Mr. Wonderful, Orndorff, Arn Anderson. What did you have a creative meeting when you first got there? Like, here's how we want to present you. Here's what your character is, or is it just totally different?
This is what happened. So I turn up on the 23rd of January. I stay at the Ramada Hotel by the airport in Atlanta. On Monday morning, I went down for breakfast and I see Chris, and he sat with Harley Race, and all the wrestlers had come into town on the Sunday night.
You're very well aware who Harley Race is, right?
Of course I was.
Okay.
I was a huge fan, and I got to meet him, and we were very close from that moment onwards. Again, another pod, because I absolutely thought the world of Harley. Again, there's another person. It's just, now that I've mentioned that, from day one, I had a sounding board, because straight away he started talking to me about Wild Angus. Friend of mine from England, Steve McCoy, he'd wrestled in the NWA in Charlotte in the late 80s, and unfortunately he didn't have a work visa, and he wrestled there for a while. Steve Casey, he wrestled there sometimes. I know it was American Steve Casey, but he wrestled with Steve McCoy, and I think that's what he was called over here. But his dad, and he was actually moving from the NWA to the Louisiana territory in the 80s, went back, got stopped on the way in because he didn't have a visa and got a 5-year ban. So he couldn't come back to America. That's another story. Right? So he was really good. Another person I got to wrestle a lot when I was young. He was
and that fantastic. Kind of thing still happens. You know, Mike Speedball Bailey just got back in the U.S. after, I think, a 5-year deal. Like, just like that. It's tough. So
his father used to wrestle in America as Black Angus. He was a big Scotsman. And as a child, he was one of my favorite villains. He was a huge man, big long beard, long hair, wore a kilt, real proper old time wrestling villain. Well, he wrestled, he came over here, and Steve told me that he didn't see his dad for 18 months. That's how this job used to be, because he came and he couldn't come going backwards and forwards, because once he got in, he didn't have a work visa. And he went to Calgary, and he went to, a lot of the lads from Britain used to go to Vancouver, and they'd go to Calgary. Some of them got into America and they stayed, and different things. So straight away I started talking to Harley Race, and he asked me if I knew Frank, his name was, and I didn't know Wild Angus. He used to be called Wild Angus in Britain. If you any historians out there, they can look up, he wrestled in the Central States territories as Black Angus, and he wrestled Harley a lot. So I had there's another sounding board, back to what we were talking about before. So I came in, and then I go to TV that day. I think it was 2:00 call time. Well, I get there early. I didn't want to ask any other people, even Chris, because I'd only met Chris once before. I'd been on a show with him in France. I didn't wrestle him that day, but we were there. And so I met him, and because we knew so many of the same people, he introduced me to Arlie. There was a few other fellas that I said hello to. I didn't want to ask anybody for a ride because I thought they don't know me. So I got a taxi down early from the Ramada Hotel to Center Stage in Atlanta. And I get there, and I've got a letter that said I had to go and introduce myself to Dusty Rhodes. So I'm there early. So I knock on the back doors. It's like a small loading dock. It's a music venue. It's a small music venue, Center Stage. I knock on the back doors. Somebody comes. I said, I'm here with WCW. It's my first day. I've got this letter. I've got to meet Mr. Rhodes. Next thing, it was somebody I became friends with later on, but I didn't know him at the time. A big, gruff-looking fella come walking up. Doug Dillinger, who was the security for WCW for years, at the same time as being a full-time policeman in Charlotte in North Carolina. So Doug came, and when you first meet Doug until you got to know him, and with a lot of people he stayed gruff, but if he figured out you were a straight up fella, like a lot of it was just being even at 24, I was a grown man, I was polite, and grown men figure each other out. When we're talking about Ron Simmons, like Ron was in WCW, then I was another fella. Straight away, we got on with each other. You end up with this Paul Orndorff, same experiences. We've all gone through this thing to get us to this point. We've all come from different worlds. We all, but we've all ended up being proper pro wrestlers. We're the real deal, right? We can do this, and you attach to like-minded pro wrestlers. Right, wherever I went in the world, there was sort of always I know it sounds bad, but there was an us and them. We're like the ones who've actually earned a spot here, and then there's sometimes, didn't matter where you went, there's these people who haven't earned the spot here, and it was just the way it was. And it's just the way it was, right? Ron Simmons, another person who was incredibly helpful to me from day one, right? He was there, and I'm not sure if he was there day one, but he was on the shows when I first came to America, always helpful, we always got on really well. So I've got to meet Dusty Rhodes. Doug Dillinger doesn't know me yet, so he just looked at me this way. So I followed Doug Dillinger down this, you have to go down this little ramp, and then Center Stage, backstage is all these little rooms, and like a little hallway, and then little rooms off it. And I get led to the very end of this, and there's nobody there. And I just get, Doug Dillinger points into this one room, and I open the door, and I walk in, and in this little 12 by 12 room, in the middle of it, is sat in a chair with nothing else there, Dusty Rhodes, completely naked, except for a pair of cowboy boots on.
Oh my goodness.
And he's just sat there. Now, again, my wrestling education, this is where it all started tying together, was from the early 80s of getting Rings wrestling magazines. Well, Dusty Rhodes was always in them. For my art O-level, although I left school at 16, you still had to do exams. And there's two types of exams at the time. There's CSE, and then there's O-level. O-level was the highest. Some things I didn't care about at school. Art was one of the things that I did. My art O-level, I had to do a couple of pictures. One of them I did because I was such a wrestling fan. One of them I did of Fit Finlay, and one of them I did of Dusty Rhodes off a cover of whichever American wrestling magazine it was, just bleeding. And I had to draw it in pencil, and that was handed in as part of my O-level. Right. And that got me well, I don't know, because I'd left home before my exam results came. I'd already left home because
You're pretty
and
invested.
moved to Blackpool. And I've still to this day have no idea whether I passed any of them or not. And kids don't pay attention to me on this, but it's never mattered to me one bit. I've got no idea what I did at school because I just did my exams and left home 6 weeks later. I worked with my dad for 6 weeks, saved enough money up to leave home, and then left home in the July of '84 and never went back, moved to Blackpool, and that was it. I became an apprentice wrestler. So I'm stood, and Dusty Rhodes is sat there. Now, I've watched a lot of Dusty's matches on tape at the time. I'm stood, and Dusty sat there with nothing on. Well, he's got a pair of these glasses on and a pair of cowboy boots. And I've gone, Mr. Rhodes, Steve Regal, nice to meet you. And I handed him this letter, and Dusty had these papers, and he just looked up slowly like that, and he looked me up and down, took this letter off me, he read it, or he pretended to read it, I don't know, and he just went, Stheven. As he's saying that, Doug Dillinger walked behind him. So now Dusty Rhodes is sat there naked with a pair of cowboy boots on, and Doug Dillinger, who was a big, impressive fella, big, gruff-looking fella, stood behind him, cross-armed, just staring at me. And I'm in a 12-foot by 12-foot room, and this man who I've watched a lot of and really, know that he's one of the greatest wrestlers ever and character, and watched his promos, and because I could get tapes and stuff by then. I've seen all this stuff because the first wrestling I saw in 1985 was the NWA from Charlotte. My friend Peter, that's the tapes that he got. So wow, it's a good introduction to American wrestling, right?
Sure.
I didn't see WrestleMania 1 till about 6 months after that. That's when we got. So that's how it was weird, right? I'm already wrestling, but first thing was the NWA. So Dusty Rhodes is sat there with Doug Dillinger behind him, and Dusty just took this letter, and I don't know what to do, because he sat there naked with this pair of cowboy boots on. And he just looked me up and down, and he went, Stheven, I'm just like Whitney Houston. I got my own bodyguard. And he pointed at Doug Dillinger. And he handed me the letter back. And then he just put his head back into his papers and was either reading them or pretending to. And I just stood there for about 30 seconds, which felt like an hour. And I just went, okay, thank you. And I just walked out the room. So that was my introduction to Dusty Rhodes. Complete and utter silence. Well, just a weird situation with him naked talking to me like that. So I walked out in a bit of a daze, not knowing what is going on.
Sure.
And I've walked into the dress. He said, somebody else said, the dress, there was all kinds of dressing rooms, but the main one's there. So I just went and sat in the corner, and the first person to come in was Mick Foley. He got there, and he was injured, I believe, at the time. And he said, I've read about you. He knew about me. He said, I've heard you're a good hand, and nice to meet you. And so that was the first person I met. The next person that came in was Brett Armstrong. Straight away, we started talking about a mutual, you've heard me mention him on this show, was my idol and one of the people who I based my style on, and the pro of pros, Pete Roberts. We both knew Pete because Brad had been to Japan with him a few times. So he said, do you know Pete Roberts? And I said, funny you should mention that. Pete's, means the world to me, and I've got a lot of Pete things for Pete, right? But so, and then he went from there. Chris came in, started talking more to him. And then Steve Austin, talking about his wife's English, and then started saying English sayings to me, and then Brian Pillman, and we knew because he'd been through Calgary, so, and it was just that, and then whoever else was following in the doors. Well, then a bit later on, I'm just sort of,
you still don't really know what's going on.
What's going on?
You just ran into
I have no idea
in the world.
I'm a British wrestler.
And,
I've got no idea. Yeah. And I've met Dusty Rhodes naked. right? I get coming into the office. So again, out of this one dressing room into this little, and they were 12 by 12 rooms. In this room, now there is Dusty Rhodes, Barry Windham, Mike Graham, Greg Gagne, Bill Watts, think Dundee. I think that was it.
For lack of a better word, the booking committee at the time?
Yes, the people who were in charge. Well, I hadn't met Bill Watts at that point, but the person who brought me. Let's get it again, because once I start talking, ask me again another time how I ended up in WCW. But this is, to get onto the point of that, else we'll never get onto it. This is my first day. So Bill Watts said, I don't want you to be, and again, I've got to use wrestling terms, and I don't like it, but I don't want you to really be a babyface or a villain. He said, I want you to be one of those British wrestlers, that do that style. And then everybody seemed to have this is like happening in like a minute now, and my head's spinning because every single one of these fellas all said, oh, do you know such and such? Because they'd been somewhere with a British wrestler, and not only do you know them, but can you do this? And it was all just these voices coming at me, and I'm going, oh yeah, but trying to be, but yes, I know, I know how to do that, I know how to do that. So my head's spinning, right? And then, but the boss is the boss. So Bill Watts finally doesn't say much, and he said, right, that's what I want you to do, is that style. Okay. Now, don't forget, I've just been especially the last 4 years before I got there, I've been all over the world, wrestling the best wrestlers. Since I was 18, I was wrestling the best wrestlers you could ever wrestle from everywhere else except for South America. And that includes Japan. Although I hadn't been to Japan then, there were Japanese wrestlers coming to Britain, and I was if I wasn't wrestling them, I was training with them, right? So I've gone and coming to Europe, and then they went again. This is one of those things. I'm not a big fan of it, but I'm going to have to tell these stories, right? You over in 3 minutes, and I went, sorry. I said, you over in 3 minutes. I went, I've never done any less than about 15 minutes or less than 5 rounds, ever. And they went, what? All of them went, what? It's like we're both talking foreign languages to each other. I said, I've never done any less than about 50, because there was times when you would do time limit at matches in England. A lot of people don't think it was all rounds. And some people listening to this won't even know what the system is in England. Most British and European wrestling, and in different parts of Africa, were based off a round system. And it was usually 6 5-minute rounds. And most of them were 2 falls. It was either 2 falls, 2 submissions, or 1 knockout would decide the winner. If you went to Germany, it was 5 4-minute rounds was a normal match.
If one of those things happened, did it end the round? Like if you took a submission?
Yes. If you took a submission, that ended the round.
Right.
Yes. And it was 2 to 1.
Right.
Or a knockout. 1 knockout was
that's it.
And then there was different forms of punishment in each country. In England, if you did something that was against the Lord Mount Evans rules, which is another story, keep a note of, because we'll get into that one day, how that came about, because that's a really great one. But you got public warnings from the referee. And if you got 2 public warnings, 3rd one was instant disqualification. In England, the rules, one punch in front of the referee that the referee saw, instant disqualification. That's why we can all do that very well. Right. Because you had to turn away from the referee and it's somebody.
So all in all, very different. Couldn't be more different than asking you to do 3 minutes and go over in 3.
Right. And they said, "What's your finish?" And I went, "I don't have one." They said, "What do you mean you don't have a finish?" I said, "Well, I just get falls or submissions, whatever." Because there was very few people had a finish. Off the top of my head, what I'm thinking of now, Jim Briggs had his arm submission, which Zack Sabre Jr. has perfected and done a lot, loads of things with. But Jim Briggs had a submission. He wasn't known for it. Finlay did a pile driver, as you call it, a tombstone pile driver. The British Kendo Nagasaki had a move, what a lot of people call a Finlay roll now, and it was called the kamikaze crash because he was supposed to be Japanese, which he wasn't. But he lived. He was a masked man, and it was an incredible mystique of this thing. He even had a finger missing on one hand. I mean, this is that was his finish, right? Very few people had finishes. You had different falls or you got whatever was needed for the match. I know that's hard to understand, but that's the way it was. Johnny Saint would do a serve, as it's called a Romanian special, right. Kind of thing. But it wasn't. That was only now and then. Right.
But it wasn't like here in America where there's Paul Orndorff hits the pile driver, it's a wrap.
No.
Right.
No, you had falls and submissions to get through the rounds and the matches. And yes, you could have a pile driver, but that would, unless it was the second fall of your second pin or submission that made you the winner, that wasn't the end of the match. Or sometimes it might be. You occasionally saw sit down pile drivers. It was usually what's considered a tombstone pile driver. Most people did that. A few people, Mark Rocco being one of them, started doing the sit down one because he was going to Japan and there was people, because of going to different countries, seeing different things and bringing them back to Britain. But so they asked me, well, I was traveling the world. When I was in it, I was never a big star. I was never a star anywhere. I'm a journeyman wrestler. Although there's times when I was used decently, but I was another wrestler on the card. I was never a star anywhere. So I just got falls, or I got a submission, or whatever was needed in the match. And this is after wrestling, like I say, 19 countries and wrestling all the best people, right? The thing what Finlay ended up doing, well, I was doing that in 93, because at one point I started doing that, and that was a direct steal from Kendo Nagasaki, because it's a good move. And a lot of people still do it, where they do the roll, and I did that because I was trying to find a finish at first. If you go back and watch any of my early stuff, especially all of it before I was even Lord Stheven Regal, which was later on in the year, in 93. I was just doing different stuff. So I said, well, I can do pretty much, you tell me I can do it. And they were like, I don't know, it was a real weird few minutes. And they were going, what do you mean? Well, I said, I can just wrestle.
Yeah, because they're going through their heads, what's with this guy? And you're going through your head, what are the expectations here?
Because I can just do stuff.
It sounds like a very challenging. So were there any suggestions that you remembered?
Well, on top of this, not only were they mentioning names, they were all saying, oh, can you do this? Basically, can you do a cravat? Can you do this? Oh, Billy Robinson used to do this. Tony Charles does that. All this is all bombarding me at the same time. And I'm going, yeah. Oh, no, actually, no, I can't do that very well. Yeah. 3-minute match, because they haven't got time to, it's like that scene at Goodfellas when Karen, his wife, first gets to meet all the other wives, right? There's just all these things going on, and I'm going, yeah. Or when Henry's a kid and it's showing all in Goodfellas where they're showing all these other gang and explaining what everyone does, or when he goes into the club and it's Tommy 2 times and all this.
Yeah, they're introducing everybody.
I'm getting all this kind of, yeah, 3 minutes. Okay, yeah, well, and I'm just pro enough to go, but I end up going, well, yeah, I can do that. But I can do this, I can do that. Well, well, what about, I said, well, I can do this side suplex thing, you know, I can suplex people all over the place. And okay, we'll just do that then, and we'll figure something out. So I walked out of there with my head spinning, right? Not knowing who to please. Is a little tip. If you find somebody, for younger wrestlers, getting too much advice can be a detriment, because you're trying to please too many people. And if you know that you've got somebody who knows what they're talking about, stick to them, right? Or one or two, because trying to please everybody or trying to take too much information, where do you start? I'm giving you a great lesson here. This is just me feeling like I was day one back on the job after 10 years of going everywhere. And especially in the last 4 years of going to all over the world and putting on really pretty solid wrestling matches. Right? I've been wrestling Fit Finlay since I was 18, having, you know, lots of matches with him. Wrestling, you know, trained by, it's just and not only wrestling, but training with, because we used to, if you're in Germany, you were in the same place for weeks at a time. What do you think he did in the afternoon? I got in the ring with the best wrestlers you could get in with and learned a lot of stuff, right? Because that's what I never wasn't learning, trying to get better.
So and you're feeling like a rookie again. You're feeling
like starting from day one. But I've got enough composure, and because I look the part, and I can get. So I go out. Well, one of the things. Well, can you do that thing and do a cravat? I want to see that. And that came from Bill Watts. Okay, listen to him, because he's paying me. He's brought me here, right? So and he's not paying me, but he's the person who's signed off on me coming here. I've never met him, right? It's just a letter. I'd worked for WCW in 1991 in England. They had a week. They wanted to see, I think have I told this story on this, where they wanted to see Giant Haystacks. I was wrestling him all the time. Famous, huge star in Britain. I was wrestling him all the time. He asked to wrestle me. I had to ask for the night off because I was booked somewhere else. I went and wrestled on the first night. And then, because WCW had started showing late night on TV in England on ITV, I went the first night. This is where, in 1989, I was wrestling for CWA in Germany for my first time. 5 weeks in Bremen, Germany. Scott Hall was there. I only found this out a couple of years ago. Everybody's got a story about Scott. I'm going to tell you mine. If I've not already told you, it's worth listening to again. Me and Scott got on very well. We shared a dressing room because it wasn't in a tent. It used to be a lot of it. It was in big circus tents in Germany, but Bremen wasn't. It was a proper building that held like 3,000 people. And then there was little dressing rooms, and I shared a dressing room with Scott Hall and an American called Steve Casey, who was a guy from Dallas, had long blonde hair. He was there. And so in 1991, Scott Hall is the Diamond Stud, and he's with WCW. I go and work with Giant Haystacks. I wrestle Giant Haystacks. Unbeknownst to me, until a few years ago, one of the agents come up and said to me, "Can you stay for the rest of the week for the next 4 shows?" And I went, because Giant Haystacks was only on for one night, and I was only there to wrestle him, because he liked wrestling me. They wanted a monster, and he was an attraction. It became, unfortunately, later on in 96, and he was not well at the time, which is another story and a sad story. But he asked to wrestle me. I'm there. I see Scott again. Hey, how you doing? That's when I first got to meet Arn and a load of people, Larry Zbyszko and people, and so and they said, "Can you stay for the week?" So I had to go and call British promoter Brian Dixon and said, "Brian, they've asked me to stage it. Is that okay?" And he went, I was booked for him for the rest of the week. He went, "Yeah, no problem." He let me stay. So because I wouldn't have turned down his bookings, I would never double book anybody. Didn't matter what the opportunity was. If he hadn't said yes, if he hadn't said yes that night, I wouldn't have ended up doing this for extra 4 days with WCW. Scott Hall, without me knowing, went to the agent in charge and said he had it at his elbow. He hadn't. And said, that lad, I know that lad, pointing at me, keep him on the tour. And this agent listened to him, and that's what kept me on the tour for a week.
Wow. Wow.
So Scott pulled what we call in England a sickie, which pretending to be sick when he wasn't.
Right.
He pretended to hurt his elbow on the first night and kept me on the tour for the week.
Wow.
Right. So that's I always got on very well with Scott, because we were just, again, we were together from 1989. So I got to that week, I wrestled Michael Hayes, Terry Garvin, Terry Taylor, and Oz. Kevin was Oz in Dublin.
Nash, right.
Yeah. He hadn't, when he was still figuring out. So they said, well, we like you. We'd like to bring you in. A few months before that, WWF, which is another story, but they got in touch with me. I'd done a tryout for them at the Royal Albert Hall. They said, we like you. We'd like to bring you in when the time's right. Well, I'll tell this story another day. Following year, I got the full 6, it was nearly 7 months for CWA, which was the big European promotion. I worked for 3 months in Austria, 3 weeks in Graz in Austria in a tournament, 7 weeks in Vienna. There was a week off. There was 9 weeks in Hanover in the same place every night, 9 weeks. And it's incredible. It was incredible. We got other stories for other podcasts. And then 5 weeks in Bremen. Well, in the September, when I was in Hanover, Rip Rogers said, I believe Bill Watts, he just called his wife. I was there. Rip Rogers was in Germany with me. He said, right. So through that, I ended up in WCW. So Bill Watts was it was the man that brought me in. Let's just get to that and revisit all the other stuff. So the last thing I hear is a cravat from Bill Watts. Can you put that in there? So I'm going out, having all this experience and wrestling, everybody in it, but not knowing what to do in 3 minutes on TV. Because to be able to do the stuff that they ask you, you have to know you don't have to. You can maneuver people into it, but it helps if the person knows somewhat what you're doing.
Sure.
With some of that stuff. I can do basic stuff with anybody, but certain things, if it's out of that person's comfort zone that you're on with, you can scare them to death with it.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you really quick, Mr. Regal, because we are going to talk about how that worked out in your first match with Bob Cook, but you talked about comfort, and science has told us that if you want to be comfortable and get the best sleep you can get and achieve and maintain consistent deep sleep is by lowering your core body temperature.
Yes.
And temperature-controlled sleep repairs muscle after a hard day's work and improves cognitive function, so you always start your day feeling sharp and alert. Yes, we are talking about chilly sleep. And Mr. Regal, you've had a lifetime of having trouble with sleep, you said.
Yes, I have.
And you have had a chance to try a chilly sleep.
Yes, I have. Very, very kindly of them to send me one. Yes, and it works a treat. It is lovely. Climb into a lovely cool bed, and it definitely does help. I certainly don't toss and turn as much. In fact, I don't toss and turn at all. And I actually, so I can absolutely, I know you used to me joking about on this, or you're not if you're first listening to it. This product is a wonderful product. I give it my absolute full endorsement. It is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It keeps you cool and comfortable, and I love it. Absolutely love it.
Well, if you're wondering what Chili Sleep is a company that makes customizable climate-controlled sleep solutions that help you improve your entire well-being. Chili Sleep makes the Uller and Cube sleep systems, which are hydro-powered, temperature-controlled mattress toppers that fit over your existing mattress to provide your ideal sleep temperature. Now, what does that mean? We never really think about it, but it really is the temperature of the bed and the temperature of your sleep situation that helps you sleep. And these luxury mattress pads keep your bed at the perfect temperature for deep sleep, whether you sleep hot or you sleep cold. These sleep systems are designed to help you fall asleep, stay asleep. and give you the confidence and energy to power through your day. Imagine waking up and not feeling tired. Chili Sleep can help make that happen. And for an extra layer of comfort, they also make the Chili Blanket, the only weighted blanket that can also be paired with a control unit for the ultimate sweat-free sleep. Man, that is a nice thing, you know. And you talked about how much you love it. I talked about how much my friend Conrad, he will talk your ears off about how much he loves Chili Sleep. And you can head over to chilisleep.com/regal to learn more and save 30% off the purchase of any new Cube or Uller sleep system. This offer is available exclusively for Gentleman Villain with William Regal listeners, and only for a limited time. That's Chili, CHILI, sleep.com/regal to take advantage of our exclusive discount and wake up refreshed every day. Now, something that might have been refreshing to you is when Mr. Bill Watts said,
Yes.
hey, do you happen to know what a cravat is? Do you happen to know?
Yes, so obviously I do. But a cravat is a really serious neck crank, and it hurts a lot if you put it on.
Us American fans may have been first actually exposed to it with Chris Hero. Chris Hero uses the cravat a lot, as far as I can tell. Is that the same kind of thing where you twist the head and you have the
Well,
hands?
they were exposed to it from old British wrestlers that came here, and including me a lot. And our friend of this podcast family, Mr. Shivani, used to, because I was doing that in 1993. As soon as I got here, I sort of brought the cravat back. Traditional European wrestling and Japanese as well, because New Japan Pro Wrestling was European wrestling had a huge influence on that. So a lot of, and I know just the other day actually was it 26 years or something since I debuted in New Japan. Well, my first night was in a tag match with Tuco Scorpio, who's somebody, by the way, who's needs a shout out as being really incredible and ahead of his time. Seems to be a lot of people think everything started in 2000 with a lot of the younger fellas, whereas we were doing it in the early 90s, myself and Scorpio and Chris and stuff.
Yeah, so I guess what I was saying with the cravat is that's the first time I literally heard it called that, right? As a wrestling fan, like we'd seen you do it, but it was something that was called.
Well, Gordon Soley used to call it, yes, Gordon knew it, and Mr. Shivani always called it a cravat and put it over. So Chris has done his thing with it and popularized it, but it was always part of and made a lot out of that and brought it to a modern audience. Let's say that, because again, I don't think it's not like I did that. You know, people were been doing that forever, and it was the last. There was some of the British wrestlers that came in the 80s didn't do that stuff. So it was the wrestlers from the 70s. I stuck to that style. I could do all kinds of different stuff, but I knew where my strengths lay. My strengths lay. I wanted to do stuff like the cruiserweights do and junior heavyweights, but I just couldn't do it. But I could do the heavyweight style, and I could do the grappling style and what. So that was one of my go-to moves. So, but if you're not used to that, and again, there would have been nobody doing that, or there may have been the fellas that been to Calgary. Bret Hart may have done a cravat. I don't know. There'd been far more people who've seen more of Bret's stuff than me. He could have, because it would have been taught to him, because he's, again, just a lot of European influence in people who come from Calgary. And knowing anybody that's been through Calgary may have used a cravat a lot, but I was used to using a cravat. It was a big part of my, repertoire. It was just a normal thing for me to go into. I know a lot of things out of that, and suplexes out of that, and all kinds of stuff that I've done over time. But it's a serious neck crank. And I think we've talked before about when I first came here, because I was not only getting told, but I didn't do the normal American style kind of thing. I never had a problem with anybody from the 80s to do any of that, because they were used to adapting to different territories, different countries and different people's styles. People that were coming along later on weren't exposed to as much. So you had to be careful what you did. I had to figure this out, what I could. Well, I go to try to put that on, and let's just say, I'm not going to explain why, it just didn't quite work out. And I don't blame it. It's because if you're on with somebody who looks like me, and I was a big person. Bob Cook was an incredible, really good at his job, but he wouldn't have been used to having a British wrestler, and especially somebody who looked like me. And, there was it was a
what do you mean somebody who looked like you?
I'm 6'3". Most people don't know how big I am until they meet me.
Right.
And I'm not, I'm not a bodybuilder, but I look like a wrestler. And I have if I go, you probably, if you see me, especially when I was younger, he looks like he could cream me. And the thing is that there was a lot of British wrestlers who came over here in Adrian Street, reveled in the fact that he could, and all the fellas could. And there's lots of stories we can get into at different times where people have tried them out and they get hurt very quickly. If you try messing, we all have a skill. I don't claim to be anything. I don't claim to be from anywhere, but just the style of wrestling alone, you learn how to put certain submissions on that you can do in pro wrestling, but you've only got to add the slightest bit of pressure and they can hurt somebody very quickly, very easily. Okay, so I don't claim to be anything. I know there's myths about me, and you never hear me saying those things.
Right.
It's just the style of wrestling that I do. Right. I do know how to apply these things. Everything I was taught, I was learned how to put on properly. And I know how to put them on properly. And I know how to hurt people with them, right? If I want to. But I don't. That's not my thing, right? There was plenty of other people from Europe that have done that, right? So there was always a bit of a myth about, and not a myth because it was the truth, about what British wrestlers could do, right? So I go to do a thing that Bob wouldn't have been used to, because nobody else would have done it. He might not have seen, since the 70s. Because although Chris Adams, Davey Boy Smith, Dynamite Kid all had their own styles, they weren't really doing that British style when they came to America. They'd figured their way of fitting into wherever they fit into. But we all learned that stuff as a young wrestler. We all learned this stuff. I just continued that whole style because it was different. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes stuck to it not all the time. And I did a lot more strikes as I got the longer I stayed in America, but I tried to because I wanted to keep that style alive, because that's what got me to the dance. That's what got me to America. And I felt like I needed to keep that style, and the people who got me here represent the style of British wrestling. That was my things, to represent British professional wrestling at its best, at what proper British wrestlers did.
So even though Bob Cook was a veteran who was really good at his job,
yes, it's very good.
Reasonable to assume he had not been exposed to that style.
And if I'm not I'm an 18-stone fella at 6'3", he might have looked at my, or seen me doing, I don't know if he saw me doing my squats and my push-ups before I went. I don't know what he saw, but
he might have thought of you as a clothesline guy, right?
Right. No, he certainly wouldn't have thought of me as that, because the word had, again, just in the afternoon when I got there, I'm not.
Word got around.
There's a English fella, and these English fella, Rick Rogers, whoever. These fellas don't, if you know anything about British fellas, they're known for being whatever they are, right? So I've got all that baggage on me before I even get here. So I'm not like some fella who's going on. And when I lock up with somebody, I lock up with them.
Right.
Right. I'm not a play out wrestler. right? You know, that's the whole, that's just the way it is. So I would imagine straight away he's thinking, I've got an handful on my hands here, and then I'm trying to put him in an hold that he's not used to. And it is as soon as you feel that on, and I just go, and that much pressure, I can hurt you very, very badly. Right? I use that in pro wrestling as a hold to apply a little bit of pressure, and to use it to tell a story.
But the option is there.
But the option to go rumph and have you dribbling and getting fed mashed up toast for the rest of your life, if I wish. Right? But I'd, right. Okay. So that didn't quite feel right to me. Plus, having this weird, again, I've got a million voices going, what's changed? What was good for me? From that first weekend, I was booked on every live event. WCW had 2 shows going on. Bill Watts booked a lot of shows. There was the A Crew, which were doing all arenas, which Sting and Lex wasn't there at the time. Lex came later. But Sting and whoever was there, but Sting was, and Vader, Sting and Vader and those guys.
The tag champs at the time, probably.
Yeah, no, the tag champs were Ricky and Shane Douglas.
Right, Steamboat, right.
Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas, I believe. And they were on with the Hollywood Blondes, which was Steve Austin and Brian Pillman.
Right.
So we had a hell of a crew. The B crew was an incredible crew of wrestlers. Main event was Steve Austin and Brian Pillman against Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas. And Ricky will not get out of that ring until there's at least 30 minutes gone.
Right.
He's getting his cardio in that ring, right? And they were all machines going, go, 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 right? Well, they didn't know what to do with it. I wrestled other people, sometimes Scorpio, which great, because he trained in Japan. So he knew because of the European influence, we knew Japan. He knew a different style. We met great opponents for each other. Brad Armstrong, excellent opponent for me. But the main person, because they didn't know what to do with either of us, they put me on with a lot of the times with Chris. Well, me and him go out and wrestle each other. Although we'd never wrestled each other until then, which was early 1993. There's a tape on YouTube. I think it's my birthday. I think May the 10th of 1993, and it's a fan cam, and you can only see bits of it. Me and him were doing the stuff that we were known for doing later on in 2000 stuff in 1993. We're doing dragon suplexes and the style of stuff that we were doing. We're
very
doing
physical,
it
very physical, right?
Completely different to anybody else. Well, Barry Windham was one of the agents. He was on all the shows. He was going back and saying, look, these lads know what they're doing. Ricky Steamboat, I've known Ricky a long time. I've never heard him swear. After the first night that he saw me and Chris, he walked up to us, and it was probably coming from him and being that age was the greatest compliment I've ever had in wrestling. He just came up out of mouth. He went, "You two are some working sons of bitches." He said, "What is that?" And he was asking us, and we were like, "Why is he asking us about doing proper wrist locks?" And
wow,
because we were doing all these, whereas Americans didn't do that at the time. They did that. If you go back, unless you saw Bret Hart occasionally do that, or a few of the Calgary guys, but they weren't known for working wrist locks like me. Well, I did.
So you made a circle with your four fingers and your thumb and said that's how they're used to doing it. I
apply a wrist lock like that.
And you do it with your thumbs together.
Do it like that.
Right.
Because they hold an arm and they crank an arm. They don't work a wrist lock.
Right.
There's a difference between working an arm, which was Americans do, which is wrestling an arm, and applying a wrist lock. Ric Flair always put on a proper wrist lock. I just assumed for years that because I knew he'd trained with Billy Robinson, and he told me, no, he said, Dory Funk. I'd watched a lot of Dory Funk before I came to America. I was a big fan of his. He always put on proper wrist locks. I find out Dory Funk told me that his dad used to like British fellas and used to bring them to his territory in Amarillo when he was young.
Right.
And so he'd learn that. Because once you learn how to put on a prop, now it's you see everybody doing that. Ricky Steamboat, I've seen and again, it sounds like I'm right. I've heard him tell people and lots of people when he was a trainer, this man pointing at me, he changed the whole thing for everybody, the way he put a wrist lock on. Everybody started doing it after that. And still people I see do this, but that's not a thing. I popularized that at that time.
Right. And that's
okay.
For those listening, it's the difference between having your thumbs flushed together and having pointed at each other.
Yes.
I'm just saying physically what I'm seeing.
Fingers are on the top part of the, it's depending where the wrist is, but then you use your thumbs to put the pressure on.
Right. Both thumbs together.
Yes. And I don't need to, I can do it with I can do it with one finger and one thumb. I can grab you by any part of your wrist, and I can put you on the floor with one finger and one thumb.
Believe you, Mr. Regal.
Right. Something else that this is part of my training. This is how British wrestlers, why we're all supposed. Nick Bockwinkel has said this, and so I'm not just Nick Bockwinkel. I've heard him say on interviews. I was very friendly with Nick Bockwinkel. There's another guy from pretty much not long after if not when I was there. Again, things happen so quick, but
yeah, he showed up about the same time.
Nick Bockwinkel was the commissioner. Well, all we did, I used to love watching Nick. I was a huge fan of Nick Bockwinkel. Straight away, me and him connected, and he's talking me through all these incredible matches with Billy Robinson. So I've got, again, another sounding board. Why do I need to listen to anybody else telling me what to do? I'm getting all the best wrestlers in America telling me how to do things, right? Or not to do them. Or if I did anything wrong, they'd say, can I have a word with you? Do you mind? And they weren't screamers and shouters. Again, same kind of people I had in Britain or Europe. Some people were not nice. Some people, and a lot of them, even if they didn't like me at first, decent enough to explain to me. So they'd, this works. Yeah. I found that this worked with Billy and this worked with Billy. So he gave me ideas. I've got Nick Bockwinkel telling me what he found worked with what Billy did that got over with the fans and what didn't.
Wow.
So you see where this is all going, right?
Absolutely. That's what you listen to.
So me and Chris were doing this stuff, and Ricky's going, wow, this. So that was a lot of what I did, but it still wasn't on TV. The talking thing, please remind me about this, because this is a whole topic about promos. But I didn't feel quite comfortable doing that. Our friend Tony Schiavone was incredibly good to me from the first week, if not the second week. He said, come down to the CNN Center, and he set a camera up that's why. If you've got this and you're not working on your promos, because you can film yourself at all times when nobody's there, there's nobody to be embarrassed in front of, you're doing yourself a disservice. Tony, I used to do it in front of the mirror, which is great. I tell people to do it in front of the mirror. Tony set a camera up for me in the CNN Center in their offices, and I used to go down on my days off, which were Wednesday, when there was other interviews going on, because I wasn't getting interviewed at first. But there was a little tiny room where they put another camera while everybody else was doing their market-specific promos, and which I ended up doing like 100 a day, and that's not an exaggeration.
Right. And for newer wrestling fans, they might not know that you would have to go in a room and they'd say, "Okay, Cleveland," and you'd say, "Okay, in Cleveland, I'm going to take on Ricky Steamboat, and you got it coming. I'm going to give you a Cleveland beaten, or whatever."
Right. Yes, and do the same ones over and over. Right. So I got. That's again, it's very easy for me to say these things. I got all these reps, but I can tell you things that did work was Tony got me a camera on the side, and I would be there for a minimum of 8 hours a day. I would be filming them and then watching them, because doing it in the mirror is one thing, trying to practice just out loud is another. When you can actually see yourself, which you have no excuse for now that you have a phone, right? You can film yourself and you can see, do I look right? Am I giving myself away in my body language? Am my eyes darting off to the side? Do I need to be focused? You can get instant feedback, right? If you're having to just do that once a week, right? When we first opened the PC, there was a room put in there, what they called the mirror room, which was a thing where you could go in at any time and press a button and film yourself as much as you wanted, and then go straight out and watch it on a screen. And at first I thought that was good. And then after a while I started looking who was going in, and I'm thinking, shouldn't have to be coming in here. I never had to come in here. I did that on my own time. That's just me, right? Not everybody's going to be good at talking, right? But there's no excuse not to be decent at it. No excuse whatsoever not to be decent at it. It's just you're not practicing enough. If you're just not working at it enough. So if you know you've got to be able to talk, you need to put time in if you brush your teeth twice a day, hopefully you do, you've got a mirror in front of you. Put 10 minutes aside and just work on anything. It doesn't matter what it is. Just anything. Say the alphabet. It doesn't matter till you find your own voice. And just keep going. So Tony was good enough to do that for me. So very quickly I got to where I could do the voice. I could talk on camera and not feel, and I'd been, again, I'm not going to get into this now. This is a whole separate podcast on just promos. Since I was 19, I'd been really working on my talking skills. But then my first day, not only have I got the nerves of being there on my first day, whatever I've done, I'm in America now. I knew I didn't answer your question at the beginning of this. You asked me if I wanted to come to America. Once I started seeing American wrestling, yes, I wanted to come to America, because I thought that's the going to be the place where everything's going. Once you've seen the production of WWE and WCW, and then I'm wrestling in halls in England with 100-watt light bulb above the ring.
Look like big time.
Right. And if you're a professional and you're in figures of money, that's where I need to be. Right? I could have, or I wanted to get a full-time gig with New Japan.
Sure.
I didn't really know. I probably, because of my connection to Pete Roberts, I may have ended up in All Japan if I'd have stayed in England. I don't know, because me and Pete, we were very good. And Pete Roberts is Stan Hansen's best friend. Once Stan moved over to All Japan, so did Pete. And Pete was on a lot of tours with Stan because they're best friends. But Pete is an incredible wrestler. It wasn't just because he was a friend. Stan wouldn't have put him in. I don't know Stan apart from saying hello a couple of times, but he's not going to kill his own credibility without putting his friend, right? Well, Pete, by the time I was in my 20s, I was getting, this is another story. I'd got offers. It didn't work out for whatever reason. That's keep that note. We'll tell that story another day.
Sure.
I ended up going to New Japan when I was in WCW in 1994, which is another thing. Let's keep on today's topic. But Tony Schiavone got me doing that. Within a short period, so they know that I can wrestle now because I'm wrestling Chris or I'm wrestling Scorpio, I'm wrestling whoever I'm wrestling. All the wrestlers are giving them good info on me about what I'm doing on live events or house shows as they were in those days. Oh, this fella he can really go and he can really wrestle. Well, but it's not matching it on TV, right? I learned another thing is another tip for young wrestlers. Just because most wrestlers won't admit they can't do something. I've learned, I know that. I learned that when I was young. If I can't do something, I'll just go, sorry, I can't do that. Because I was trying to do things, again, because I was listening to the people paying me or the people that were working for the people paying me. Oh, this fella that we know from England used to do this. I used to do a flying ankle scissors. Eddie Guerrero used to do it with me later on because he could do it. And they said, can you do that? And I said, oh yeah, I can do that. Dave Taylor does it incredibly well. And Steve Wright was the master at it. It was Alex Wright's dad. He was incredible, right? But I could do it. I wasn't as good as them at doing it, but I could do it. But it's a special thing that you need, and you need somebody to take it in a certain way. I'd asked a certain person, I was on TV with them, can you do that? Oh yeah, I can do that. And then I did it, and they didn't know how to do it because they'd never seen it. So just because you can doesn't mean you have to. Make sure, that's why you should be watching all the matches and not watching your phone when you're at work, so you can watch all the wrestlers and know what they can and can't do. So don't ever put your stuff on them that if you see them and they can't, you know that they're don't blame them for anything. It's not their fault if they don't know a certain thing. But I've seen that a lot of wrestlers come out and scream at somebody for not knowing something. It's not their fault if they don't know how to do a certain thing.
Right.
Don't take it out on them. It's your fault for trying to do it with them. Right? That's part of your studying. That's part of your job as a professional, is to watch everything. So you know, John Cena watched everything, so he knew exactly what everybody did, and he could put his stuff in with it or around it. That's why he's John Cena, right? All these things, I know I waffle on, but if you listen to them, there's points to everything. That's why. If you're not watching the matches, as was the case when I came to WCW, there was these, what I call 90s wrestlers that had gone, had come through a different time. Every time, when I was watching wrestling, when the matches were on, Steve Austin was watching. Brian Pillman was watching. There's a few others that were there at the time, weren't watching. They'd left the building, or they were talking about egg whites and tanning. Right? We were watching wrestling. We're still about in this job in some form or another, or people remember us for something. Right?
Right. Absolutely.
And then go back and look at who was around in WCW then and see how many of them stayed in this job for any length of time. It's a pretty easy thing to figure out, right? The ones who put the most work in, you don't know if you're ever going to use it, but it's worth knowing because you never know when you're going to need it. Right? I know this is going to be a long podcast today. Let's cut this now because I don't want to ruin people's idea if this is the first time they're listening, because we haven't even got that first day one yet.
It's all good. And I think a good closing point for today's episode is the Bob Cook match, like your first match. And, you talked about just a few minutes ago about how, as a wrestler, it's your responsibility to know what someone can't do.
Can't do. I shouldn't have tried to do something with him that he wasn't comfortable with.
So how did that match? I had trouble finding that match. How did that match all turn out for you?
It was okay, but I should have also realized that Bob Cook was a big fella, and he wasn't the easiest person to do the kind of suplex that I did on him, because I don't have as much control as I do with a double arm suplex, or as you Americans call it, a butterfly suplex, or as Europeans call it, a double arm suplex. So I should have done that, because that was a famous, I know Dory Funk did it, but Billy Robinson was, I had a match with Mr. Antonio Inoki, and I made sure, and he didn't want to be suplexed. He tried his best not to. I made sure I got a double arm suplex in on him. I got hold of him, and believe me, he didn't want to go. He went because I wanted the Saint to have a picture, because Billy Robinson had a picture of throwing Mr. Inoki through the air. And there's a picture on a t-shirt on Pro Wrestling Tees right now of me throwing Mr. Inoki through the air. And believe me, he did not want to go. But I can pick you up. I don't care, because especially, again, I'm a lot bigger than most people think, and I can muscle people about but this kind of suplex I did on Bob Cook, it was a awkward thing. And it took me a long time there. Even then, once I changed it, story. Again, we've got so many we can talk about, but my work and my wrestling kept me in people's, eventually, Dundee was one of the producers, their agents there. I said to Dundee, sometimes you've got to make things people think it's their idea. I knew that I needed to be a villain, because as a villain, I could control the match more. And I knew that nearly with the exception in the 70s, nearly all the British wrestlers who come here, even Billy Robinson at one point, although he wasn't, Lord Alfred Hayes was Lord Alfred Hayes, there was a time when they were together and he was doing more of like a noble gimmick. I've seen an interview with those two together. And so it was just the stereotypical thing to be a lord. And I knew enough, although I was more of a wrestler and a good guy wrestler when I was in Europe, I'd been around all the best villains I could have ever seen. And I studied loads of British comedy. Well, there's always a stereotypical British villain, like Terry Thomas in Disney movies. So I said to Pat Roach was a incredible wrestler from Britain. He was also in a lot of movies. He's the only guy that's in, apart from Harrison Ford, in the first 3 Indiana Jones movies. He played a different role in each one. He's the bald guy that he has a fight with the and then the airplane.
The propeller death. Yeah.
Well, Pat was in a lot of movies, and Pat was a very good friend of mine and helped me a lot. Pat, let me say this, Pat didn't lose to many people. Pat willingly would lose to me when I was in my 20s. That's so again, that's a little, it's not about me. If you're polite and you actually look like you're trying to learn this job, people are more willing to help you. If you actually work hard and are polite and decent and turn up like a pro, like we started this off with Claudio, Pat Roach would willingly put me over, willingly let me beat him without any arguments, he could have gone, no, I'm Pat Roach, I don't need to be getting beat by him. And willingly, and I'm like sat there going, because I'd heard all these stories that he wouldn't do that unless he thought you were somebody special. I didn't ask him why. He just went, no, I like this lad. I've learned that that's why, because that people have being a pro and being the right kind of way and so again, another lesson. But Pat had wrestled in the LA area in the 70s as Lord Pat Roach, Lord Alfred Hayes. So I said, and I had this idea of this villain, but also a lot of stereotypical movie villains, British movie villains that are all these, dirty, rotten scoundrels, basically, which they made a movie out of as well, right? It's Michael Caine in that movie.
Yep.
That was a big, I love that movie. So
great movie.
I can do all this stuff. So I mentioned it to Dundee in about April of 93. I said, look, I'd be better off being a villain and I could do this Lord thing. A month later, Dusty Rhodes come up to me. By that now, that was another thing. In March, Bill Watts went.
Right. A lot of turnover all the time.
Right. So Bill Watts went. Well, I thought, I'm going. Because usually whoever comes in brings their crew in, their crew goes.
Their boys go too. Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, okay, well, and I was just not panicking. It's okay. I knew I could go back to Germany 6 months a year. I knew I'd get into Japan eventually. I had other things on the table with a friend of mine in Blackpool who'd offered me the money to start running a really professional kind of wrestling business, which is another deal. There's another story. A lot of people don't know that, but I had the money on the table from a big money friend of mine because I always wanted a professionally run, safe, nice place for British wrestlers so they hadn't got to worry about getting a weekly paycheck, and so that they all had the right conditions and good rings. I'll let that sit with any people and see where things went. And if you know me, what happened, right? I always wanted that to happen. And I had the money, but I came to America, so it never happened. But I had the money in 1992, if I wanted it, to start that. And I was going to make a professional thing as well as me. And I had everybody ideas picked out of who could run it for me when I was out the country working in other places.
But luckily for all of us, that turned out because Dusty came to you.
Dusty came to me and went, again, I love Dusty. Me and Dusty, I have nothing. I had so many fond memories of him, but we hadn't really got to know each other that much at that time. And I think because he only saw me at TV, so he's only seeing the 3 minutes or 5 minutes at TV. Probably not thinking that much of me. But if he's hearing Barry Windham, who he knows, telling him this lad's good, that helps, right? I'm not going up to him. I never had a conversation with him. I'm not one of them people who puts yourself forward. I just take whatever's coming and I'll make the most of it. But I did tell Dundee this, and Dusty came up to me and went, Stheven, I got this wonderful idea for you. We're going to call you Lord Stheven Regal. And the actual first that he mentioned, he was going to put Larry Zbyszko with me. Larry Zbyszko's real name is Whistler. Now, for some reason, Dusty thought that sounded English. So it was going to be Lord Stheven Regal with Sir Lawrence Whistler.
Oh, my goodness.
That was the original plan. What I didn't know, I only found out, I didn't know this till later on. Dundee, being what he is, he said, because Dundee is actually Scottish, he's not Australian.
He got himself in there, huh?
He said, I can do that. So I had no clue about any of this until a long time after it had all finished. I found this out after Bill had gone. He had gone in and basically took the job off Larry. So me and Larry had a great feud the year later. And I don't know if Larry even knows that he should have been in that spot.
Wow.
But I know directly that Larry should have been my manager. And Dundee had got that job. So anyway, whatever got there, we could start at Lord Stheven Regal as another topic, because that's when a whole new world started, right? So we've got up to Lord Stheven Regal, and we really haven't finished that off. But what it was my wrestling ability, wrestling and having on a great crew of doing lots of house shows and showing that I could do stuff that nobody else could really do, doing a lot of things that nobody really cared about then, but also a lot of it came into play in the 2000s, because people like Daniel Bryan came along and popularized this hybrid kind of thing that me and Chris were doing, and Scorpio was already doing. We were all doing it in 1993 before all these lads were born. And that's not, but if we ended up blending and doing our things and going elsewhere. And then Dean and Eddie and sort of Chris came back into play in 1995 because of ECW. But really, we were all doing it. We were already, there was us three were already, me, Scorp and Chris. Because if you go back, if you want any proof of that, there's a pay-per-view. I wasn't on it, but I went to it. It was in the February of 93 when I first got here. And they didn't know what to do with either of them, really. They knew what to do with Scorp, they didn't with Chris, but they put them all together it was in Asheville, I think, North Carolina. Is it South Carolina or North Carolina? I'm sorry.
Asheville, North Carolina.
North Carolina. I think it was Asheville, but they put Chris and Scorp on together. That match is so ahead of its time, it's not even funny, right? And people forget about that. So if you think that we weren't and me and Chris and Scorp were all doing that on live events in 1993, that style became popular again in 2000, but with a younger group of people. Well, so if anybody wants to know where my influence goes with that, and then Dean came along and Eddie came along and whatever. But the three of us were doing different stuff in 1993.
And as a fan watching at the time, it was a unique style, unique look. And this is a unique podcast and been a very unique episode of Gentleman Villain. Of course, we talked about where Mr. Regal arrived in WCW, but we talked about everything in between. Thank you to all the listeners. Make sure to follow us on Gentleman Regal, and follow Mr. Regal at Real King Regal. Follow me at Matt Coon Music. And special thank you to all the people that work on the show. It's such a great thing to work on a podcast where, man, I tell you, it started with like four of us, me, Bruce, Silva, and Conrad, like 5 years ago. And now there's a whole team. We have Diaz helping us out today. Steve Kaufman's usually with us. Derek with the research. Dominic with all kinds of help, including social media. And Wesley doing the producing. There's so many people, of course, Dave Green and Conrad, Thanks to you guys. And thank you, Mr. Regal, for another great episode of Gentleman Villain Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me in your ears. And if you're watching this, I'm seriously, thank you for taking your precious time to watch and to listen to us. Thank you.